Dante Bellondi didn't ask. He never asked. He summoned. The envelope arrived at Elena Marlowe's apartment at 7 in the morning, slid under the door like it owned the building. Insides, one line typed on cream-colored paper that probably cost more than her rent: be at the estate by 9. Come alone. No please. No signature. Dante Bellondi didn't need one. The whole city knew his stationery the way they knew a loaded gun pointed at their face, by what it meant, not what it said. Elena stood in her kitchen in yesterday's clothes, reading that line 3 times. She had been awake since 4, running numbers on a legal case that was going nowhere. Coffee she'd made 2 hours ago sat cold on the counter. She read the note a 4th time, set it down and drank the cold coffee anyway. She was not afraid of Dante Bellondi. That was either her greatest strength or the most catastrophic mistake of her life, and she genuinely could not tell which. If you've ever been handed an ultimatum dressed up as an invitation, if you've ever stood in a room where the air itself felt like a warning, then you already know what Elena felt walking up those black marble steps in the rain. You already know that sick, clear feeling when you realize that everything about to happen was decided before you arrived. This story is for the people who ever looked at power and said no, and meant it, even when it cost them everything. If this story is hitting something real in you, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Every week we bring you stories like this one raw, dramatic, the kind that stay with you. Drop a comment below and tell us what city or country you're watching from. Seriously, we read those. We want to know how far this story travels. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And let's get into part 1. The Bellondi estate sat at the northern edge of the city, where old money had built its walls thick enough to keep out the noise of everyone else's problems. The iron gate was 12 feet tall and never rusted, because someone was paid specifically to make sure it never rusted. The driveway was long enough that by the time you reached the front door, you'd had the full 2 minutes to reconsider whatever you were about to say. Lena had driven it 4 times in her life. Each time she had arrived with something to lose. This morning she arrived with the decision already made, and that was a different thing entirely. She was soaked through by the time she reached the top step. The rain had gone from heavy to merciless, somewhere between the gate and the entrance. The kind of rain that doesn't care what you're wearing or where you're supposed to be. Her black coat, the good one she wore to court, when she needed to look like she couldn't be rattled, was pressed flat against her shoulders. Her hair was gone. Whatever careful arrangement she'd constructed that morning, destroyed in 40 feet of open driveway. She hadn't run. She had walked the whole length of it because she refused to arrive breathless. The door opened before she knocked. A man she recognized as Richie Tall, rectangular, the kind of quiet that wasn't peace, but readiness stepped back to let her in without a word. He'd worked for Dante for 11 years. In that time, Elena had never heard him offer more than 3 words in sequence. He took her coat without asking, held it away from his suit like it was evidence, and gestured toward the hallway that led to Dante's study. She already knew the way. The house smelled like leather, and something Elena couldn't name, but had always associated with wealth that was old enough to stop proving itself. There were no personal photographs in the entrance hall. There had never been in any of her visits. Just framed architectural drawings of buildings the Bellondi family owned or had once owned, hung with the kind of deliberate spacing that communicated control, even in decoration. She stopped at the study door, heard nothing from inside. She knocked twice, clean and firm. "Come in." Dante Bellondi was standing at the window when she entered. He was 51 years old, and he looked it in the honest way. Not softened, not collapsed, just made of more years than he'd started with. His shoulders were still wide, his posture still the posture of a man who had never once needed to make himself bigger to take up space. He was holding a coffee cup in one hand. His other hand was in his trouser pocket. He did not turn around when she entered. "You walked in the rain," he said. Not a question. "Your driveway isn't covered. I could have sent a car." "You didn't." He turned then and she held the eye contact the way she'd trained herself to hold it in courtrooms, when opposing counsel was trying to make her blink. Dante's eyes were dark brown, almost black in certain light, and they had the particular quality of someone who had learned to reveal nothing by practicing it so long it had become involuntary. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand." Something shifted in his expression. Not anger. More like adjustment. The small recalibration of a man who had expected the negotiation to begin at a different point. He set the coffee cup on his desk and sat down himself. The chair was leather, old. The kind of chair that had heard 1,000 conversations and absorbed all of them without flinching. "Your father's debt," he said. "I know about my father's debt." Then you understand why you're here. I understand why you think I'm here, Elena said. That's not the same thing. Dante looked at her for a long moment. The rain hit the window behind him in irregular bursts. Somewhere deeper in the house, a door opened and closed. The Marlowe family owes this organization $430,000, he said. Your father borrowed against assets he didn't own. He made promises he had no legal capacity to make. The interest on that debt has been running for 3 years. He paused. You're the family's lawyer. I'm a lawyer, she said. I stopped being the family's anything a long time ago. Your name is still Marlowe. My name is still Marlowe, she agreed. That's the only thing I share with my father's decisions. Dante laced his fingers on the desktop. I'm prepared to forgive the entire debt, restructure what remains, clear every obligation your father created, including the ones that don't appear on paper. She waited. In exchange for a formal alliance between our families, he said, specifically a marriage. The word sat in the air between them. Elena had known this was coming. She had known it the way you know a season is changing, not from a single sign, but from the accumulation of smaller ones that stop being coincidental and start forming a pattern. The invitation that wasn't an invitation. The timing of her father's sudden urgent calls. The way Dante's intermediary had been circling her at the Marchetti fundraiser 2 weeks ago, asking the kind of careful questions that weren't really questions. She had prepared for this. She had rehearsed. She had told herself that when the moment arrived, she would be measured, strategic, controlled. Instead, she looked Dante Belandi directly in the eyes and said, I won't become your wife. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of an awkward moment. The other kind. The kind that has weight. Dante's jaw set. The fingers on the desktop didn't move. She watched him process what she'd said the way she watched juries process an unexpected piece of testimony. The small visible moment where the mind has to reroute around something it didn't anticipate. That's my answer, she said. I'm not a debt settlement. I'm not an asset transfer. My father made his choices. Those choices are not my inheritance. The temperature in the room changed. Dante stood slowly, and when he stood, the space between them felt smaller, even though neither of them had moved. You're telling me no, he said. I'm telling you no. In my house. In your house, she confirmed. That's where you invited me. Something crossed his face, and for one unguarded second it was not anger, not calculation. It was something closer to surprise. Real surprise, the involuntary kind, and Elena filed it away immediately, because she understood that it meant something important. Dante Belandi had genuinely not considered that she might refuse. He opened his mouth to respond, and that was when the door crashed open. The boy in the doorway was 16, maybe 17, with Dante's dark coloring and a jaw that would eventually look like his father's but hadn't arrived there yet. He was in a school shirt, with the collar wrenched half open, his hair disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed. Not from crying, but from something worse than crying, from holding it. He was breathing like he'd been running, or like he'd stopped himself from running at the last second. Nico Belandi stood in the doorway of his father's study and looked like someone who had just heard something he could not unhear. Dante's demeanor changed instantly, and the change was not softening. It hardened in a different direction. This room is closed, Dante said. His voice was quiet in the way that particular kind of authority goes quiet. The volume drops, but the weight doesn't. Nico's eyes moved from his father to Elena and back. Need to talk to you. Not now, I heard Uncle Matteo, Nico said. I heard what he was saying to you in the hall. About the accounts. About. Dante's voice cut across the room like a flat blade. Not now. The boy's throat moved. He was trying to hold something together and not succeeding. Elena watched him, the way she'd learned to watch witnesses before cross-examination, looking for the thing, underneath the thing, the actual stress fracture beneath the surface presentation. What she saw was not a teenager having a tantrum. What she saw was a kid who was terrified and had learned in this house that terror was not an acceptable thing to show, and so it was coming out as anger, because anger was the only permitted currency. Fine, Nico said. The word came out flat and brittle. Fine, I'll handle it myself. He turned and disappeared from the doorway, and the sound of his footsteps going down the hallway was too fast and too deliberate. The sound of someone moving before they fall apart. Dante looked after his son for a long moment. Then he turned back to Elena, and she could see him reassembling the shutdown, the sealing off, the resumption of the meeting that had been interrupted. We weren't finished, he said. But Elena was no longer looking at Dante. She was looking at the empty doorway where Nico had been standing, and she was thinking about the sound of those footsteps and about the particular shape of a child who has learned that the only safe thing to feel is the thing that looks strongest, She had grown up in a house with those acoustics. She knew exactly what they cost. She asked to use the restroom. Richie pointed her toward the east corridor. She walked in that direction, and then kept walking, following the sound she thought she might have heard. A door. A voice. Nothing definite. Just the instinct of someone who had navigated other people's emotional architecture for 32 years. She found Nico in the library. He was standing at the far end of the room with his back to the door, both hands pressed flat on the surface of a reading table, and he was breathing in that particular controlled way. That means the controlling is almost over. He heard her come in and straightened immediately, turned with the defensive posture of someone who has been caught being human. "Wrong room," he said. His voice was almost steady. "Probably," Elena said. She didn't move toward him. She'd learned that with people who were barely holding it together, proximity was an intervention. And sometimes intervention was the wrong tool. She stayed near the doorway and looked around the room with the deliberate casualness of someone who genuinely found libraries interesting. "A lot of books," she said. He stared at her. "Who are you?" "Elena Marlowe." "I had a meeting with your father." Something moved in his expression. "The Marlowe woman," he said. It landed with the flatness of a phrase he'd heard from someone else, verbatim. That's one way to put it. He looked at her for another moment, calculating something. "Then are you going to marry him?" "No," she said. The word surprised him more than she expected. He blinked. "Why not?" "Because I don't want to." "People don't—" He stopped. Started again. "People don't usually tell my father no." "No," she agreed. "I've noticed that." He turned back to the table, staring down at its surface. His hands were fists at his sides now, not on the table. She could see the tension in the line of his shoulders, the particular architecture of someone holding the shape of themselves together by force. "What did you hear?" she asked, quietly, not pushing. His jaw worked. "Enough." "What's enough?" He turned around sharply. "I heard my uncle telling my father that the Savini family is already talking. That there's going to be a move against the organization within the month. That someone's been feeding information." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and he pulled it back viciously, swallowed it. "And my father's answer was to bring in a wife. Like that fixes something. Like that ever fixed anything." Elena watched him. "My mother died 3 years ago," Nico said. The flatness in his voice was doing too much work, and he stopped. He didn't even— Another stop. "You don't have to explain it," Elena said. "I'm not explaining it." He ran a hand through his hair. That gesture of frustrated helplessness that belongs exclusively to teenagers and to men who haven't yet learned to translate what they're feeling into words that don't sound like weakness. "I'm just telling you why I heard what I heard, because I was standing outside a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear, because I don't get information in this house. I get instructions. I get told where to be and what time to be there and what to wear, and nobody—" He stopped again. "Nobody actually talks to me." The library was quiet. Elena crossed her arms, not defensively, but the way you cross your arms when you're actually thinking. "What did Matteo say exactly?" she asked. "About the accounts." Nico looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. The recognition that she was asking a real question, not a deflecting one. "He said there was money missing," Nico said slowly. "He said it happened after my mother died. He was saying it to my father like he hesitated, like he was accusing him, but quietly. The way he says things where you can't actually catch him saying them." Elena didn't react outwardly. Inside she was very, very still. "How long has your uncle been having those conversations?" she asked. "I don't know." "A while." Nico looked at her with the wary assessment of someone who had been burned by trusting the wrong person. "Why are you asking me this?" "Because what you just described is not a family argument," Elena said. "And because you're clearly not an idiot, and someone in this house should be treating you like one isn't." He stared at her. She looked back at him evenly. "I have to get back," she said. "Your father is waiting for an answer I've already given him." She moved toward the door, then stopped. Looked back at Nico. "What you heard in that hallway, don't let anyone convince you that you misunderstood it." She left him there. Dante was standing where she'd left him, or close enough to it that the difference didn't matter. The coffee cup was still on the desk. He'd moved to the window again, arms folded, looking at the rain. "Your son is in the library," Elena said when she came back in. Dante turned slightly. "I'm aware of where my son is. He's not doing well." Something crossed Dante's face. It was not indifference. That was the thing. The thing that probably nobody in this house had permission to acknowledge. It was not indifference. It was something closer to a wound that had been closed wrong, sealed over before it healed, and it ached under the surface of every expression he made that had anything to do with the boy. My son is not your concern, Dante said. Maybe not, Elena said. But here's my concern. You're about to lose him. Dante said nothing. He's 16, Elena said. He's in that library right now, trying to hold together the information that his uncle has been running some kind of quiet undermining operation, and his father's response to organizational crisis was to offer to trade a marriage like it was a land acquisition, and nobody— She caught herself, regulated her voice. Nobody is actually talking to him. He knows what's happening in this house, the way all kids know things by standing outside doors and listening, and then being told he misunderstood. Dante's expression had closed completely. I grew up in a house like this, Elena said. Not this house. But with this architecture, the kind where what happens is never what it's called, where the family business is everything, and the actual family is the thing you get to when there's time, and there's never time. She paused. My father is the reason I'm in this room right now. My father and the decisions he made while he was building, whatever it was he thought he was building. The rain hit the window in a sudden harder burst. I won't marry you, Elena said. That is not changing. But I'll tell you what I will do. She looked at him steadily. I'll stay. Not as your wife. Not as an ornament or an alliance or a legal convenience. I'll stay as Nico's legal guardian, on paper and in practice. Whatever Dante had expected her to say next, it was not that. She watched the information land, watched him process it with the particular controlled blankness of a man who needed a moment he wasn't going to allow himself to take. You're suggesting, he said slowly, that you become his stepmother, technically. In legal terms. She kept her voice even, which gives him an adult in this house who is accountable to him rather than to you, who can make decisions on his behalf, who gives him a formal structure of protection that doesn't depend on anyone's mood or political position. She paused. Which also, incidentally, makes it very difficult for anyone trying to use your son against you to get to him without going through legal channels first. Dante stared at her. You're not doing this to the family, he said. The observation was careful, precise. I'm doing it for the kid in the library, she said, who is smart enough to understand what he's watching happen and scared enough to pretend he isn't. The silence stretched. Dante walked to his desk, not to sit, just to have something to stand near. Put both hands on the edge of it and looked down at its surface for a long moment. Elena waited. She was good at waiting. You'd be in my house, he said. I'd be in Nico's house, she said. That's different. Not to me. Then we'll have to work with that. She paused. Unless you'd prefer to send your son back to a school he hates, in a city where everyone knows his last name and what it means, with nobody in his corner who doesn't answer to you. Dante looked up. I've seen his file, Elena said. Academic probation last semester. 2 incidents in the fall. He's drowning. And you're giving him a dress code. She hadn't seen his file. But the look on Dante's face told her she was close enough to write that the distinction didn't matter. How do you know about the incidents? Dante said. His voice was very quiet. I know how institutions talk, she said. And I know how a teenager looks when he's been told the only acceptable way to feel is the way that doesn't inconvenience anyone. Something in Dante's face moved. Something deep, under the controlled surface. The thing he kept buried because if he let it up, it would be catastrophic. He turned away from her, back to the window. His reflection was faint in the rain-darkened glass. My wife, he said. The past tense was deliberate. Lucia, she was the one who he stopped. Didn't finish. Nico was close to her. I know, Elena said gently. He blames me. She didn't confirm or deny it. She just let the sentence exist in the room. I'm not asking you to give me access to your business, Elena said. I'm not asking to know things you don't want known. I'm asking you to sign paperwork that protects your son legally and to allow me to be a consistent, present adult in his life who isn't you. She let a beat pass. That's the deal. Dante turned around. His face was composed again. The vault door closed, but his eyes were not quite matching it. And if I say no? He said. Then I leave, she said. I walk back out through your rain-soaked driveway. I get in my car, and I spend the next 6 months fighting my father's debt in civil court instead of having it resolved. I lose probably, but I lose having said no. She held his gaze. I'm used to losing with my integrity intact. Another long silence. Dante Belandi, feared across 3 counties, known in federal records under 7 different organizational designations, looked at Elena Marlowe in her damp good coat and made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and not quite anything else. You walked in the rain, he said again. Your driveway isn't covered, she said again. He looked at her for a moment that lasted long enough to mean something. Then I'll have my lawyer draw up the documents. Elena didn't celebrate. She didn't allow herself to exhale too fully. She had won the room, And she knew, in the specific way that comes from having been a lawyer long enough, that winning a room is not the same as winning anything that matters. It was the first step of something that was about to get significantly more complicated. And the part of her that was honest with herself had already started cataloging the ways it could unravel. She went back to the library. Nico was still there. He had sat down at the reading table, his arms crossed on its surface, and he looked up when she came in with the wariness of someone who had already been disappointed enough times to assume the default. "You're still here," he said. "I am." She sat down across from him at the table. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen before you react." He looked at her, said nothing. "Your father and I just agreed that I'll be staying," she said. Not as his wife, as your legal guardian." She watched his face. "Stepmother, in the technical sense. It means that on paper I'm accountable to your welfare. I can make decisions on your behalf. I can access information about your education, your health, your living situation. And no one can remove me from that role without going through legal channels." The boy stared at her. "I didn't ask for that," he said. "I know. I don't need a babysitter." "You don't have one," she said. "What you have now is an adult in this house who has a legal obligation to you rather than to your father. That's different." She kept her voice steady, matter of fact, because she'd learned that teenagers rejected the things that were offered with too much warmth before the trust was built. "You don't have to like it. You don't have to like me. But the structure exists." Nico looked at the table. His jaw was tight. "Why?" he said. The question was smaller than his voice was trying to make it. "Because I heard what you said in this room," she said. "Because you were right, and nobody was going to tell you that, and someone should have." He looked up at her then, and the thing that crossed his face, not trust, not gratitude, just the raw, startled look of someone who had expected a different answer, was exactly what she'd been watching for. He looked back down. "Uncle Matteo is going to hate this," he said. "Yes," Elena said. "I expect he will." She ate dinner at the Belandi estate that evening because Ricci informed her, with 3 words and a gesture, that a room had been prepared and that dinner was served at 7. Eslina understood that this was Dante's way of making the new arrangement real before he had time to reverse it, because men who made decisions the way Dante made decisions understood that momentum was a form of contract. She ate alone in a dining room built for 12. Dante did not appear. Nico appeared at 7:15, stood in the doorway for a moment, assessing her presence at the far end of the long table, and then sat down at the opposite end. They ate in silence for the first few minutes. The food was good. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the specific silence of 2 people deciding whether they were willing to be in the same room. It was Nico who broke it. "You said I was right," he said. "About Uncle Matteo." "I said you weren't wrong about what you heard," Elena said. "That's slightly different." He considered this with the seriousness of a kid who was accustomed to being gaslighted. "You think he's doing something. I think the behavior you described is consistent with someone running a quiet operation," she said. "That's all I know right now." "My father trusts him," Nico said. "Too much. I know. Because after my mother died, Matteo was..." He put down his fork. "He was the one who handled things, who kept the organization running, while my father was..." Another stop. The stops were where the things lived that Nico couldn't say yet. Matteo was there. "And my father feels like he owes him for that." "Debt," Elena said, "is a very useful thing to create in someone." Nico looked at her. She picked up her fork again. "Eat your dinner." He ate. 20 minutes later, when the plates had been cleared and they were both sitting with water and the particular fatigue of people who had been through more than one kind of difficult in a single day, Nico looked across the length of the table at Elena. "I still don't know if I like you," he said. "That's fine," she said. "But I think..." He stopped. "I think you might actually know what you're doing." "Jury's still out," Elena said honestly, "but I appreciate the provisional confidence." Something shifted in his face, not quite a smile. The blueprint of one. She drove home that night in the wet city and sat in her parking garage for 10 minutes before she got out of the car, because her hands needed to stop shaking before she went upstairs. Not from fear. From the delayed recognition of what she had actually done. She had walked into Dante Belandi's house to negotiate a debt. She had walked out as a member of his family. The next morning arrived with the specific coldness of a city that has been rained on and hadn't decided what it wanted to be afterward. Elena was in her office at 8, with 3 files open on her desk and a phone that had been ringing too consistently since 7:30. 2 of the calls were from her father. She let both go to voicemail. The third was from a number she didn't recognize. She answered the third. "Miss Marlowe." The voice was smooth, rehearsed in its smoothness, the kind that had practiced being pleasant, the way a knife practices being sharp. I don't believe we've been formally introduced. I'm Matteo Bellondi. She said nothing for 1 second only, Mr. Bellondi, she said. Good morning. I understand there may have been some paperwork discussed yesterday, Matteo said. The pleasantness did not waver. Regarding guardianship arrangements. You'd need to speak with your brother's legal team about any formal documents, she said. Of course, he said. Of course. I'm not calling about the paperwork exactly. I'm calling because I think it would be valuable for us to sit down, you and I separately from all the noise. A brief collegial pause. You're new to this family's dynamics, and I'd hate for you to find yourself in an uncomfortable position because of a misunderstanding. Elena looked out her office window at the gray morning city. I appreciate the thought, she said. My calendar is quite full at the moment. It doesn't have to be formal, he said. Just a conversation. I'll be in touch, she said, if I find I need one. She ended the call and sat looking at her phone for a moment. Then she opened a new document on her computer and started typing. Everything Nico had told her about the conversation in the hallway. The accounts. The accusations framed as concern. The particular way Matteo Bellondi said the dangerous things quietly. She saved the document under a file name with no identifying information and emailed it to her personal encrypted server. Then she called her assistant and told her to push her 9 o'clock. She needed to go back to the estate. Dante was in a meeting when she arrived. Ricci communicated this with his face and a slight angle of his chin. Elena said she would wait, and she waited in the entrance hall, and she used the time to observe the house more carefully than she had the day before. The movements of staff, the rhythm of the place, who came and went, and by which doors. Matteo Bellondi arrived at 9:45. She had not expected him to arrive while she was there, and she registered that this was probably not a coincidence. He was younger than Dante by 8 years, 43, dark like his brother, but with a different quality to it, the kind of dark that was curated rather than intrinsic. Handsome in a way he was clearly aware of. He smiled when he saw her, and the smile was warm and without hesitation, and it was exactly the smile she would have put together in her head based on the phone call that morning. Ms. Marlowe, he said, crossing the entrance hall toward her, with the ease of someone who had always owned these floors. We spoke this morning, we did. He extended a hand. She shook it. His grip was calibrated, firm enough to signal confidence, restrained enough to signal consideration. Practiced. I hope you'll give me a few minutes, he said. I don't want us to start off a pause. A slight tilt of the head complicated. Of course, she said. My brother, Matteo said, cares about this family. He always has. He carries that in ways that aren't always visible. Another calibrated pause. Nico is important to him. I want you to know that. I'm sure he is, Elena said. I just wouldn't want anyone to develop the wrong impression of the family dynamic here. It can seem from the outside like things are harder than they are. Dante runs things a certain way, and Nico is at an age where he smiled again, the gentle exasperation of a man performing reasonableness. He's 16. He sees things in a particular light. Most 16-year-olds do, Elena said. Exactly. He nodded. Exactly. So I hope you'll take the things he may have shared with a brief search for the word context. Elena looked at him. I haven't had a substantial conversation with Nico about family matters, she said. We've barely met. The smile didn't change, but something behind it did. Of course, Matteo said. Of course, I just wanted to introduce myself. Welcome you in a sense. He held the smile for one more measured beat. I hope you'll find things here more straightforward than perhaps the circumstances suggested. She returned the smile with one of her own, equally constructed, equally pleasant, equally empty of everything that was actually happening. I'm sure I will, she said. He excused himself a moment later, disappeared toward Dante's wing of the house. Elena stood in the entrance hall and breathed in and breathed out. The game had begun. She'd known when she drove here this morning that she had walked into something larger than a debt negotiation and a guardianship agreement. She'd known it the way you know things when you've spent enough years working in rooms where the surface and the substance are always different things. What she hadn't known was how quickly Matteo Bellondi would move to identify her as a problem. He'd called her at 8 in the morning. He'd been at the estate by 9:45. Whatever Matteo was running inside this organization, whatever quiet long-term play he'd been building, her arrival had put it at risk. And the people who built quiet long-term plays did not respond to risk by waiting. She went to find Nico. He was in the kitchen, not eating, just sitting at the counter with a glass of water and a textbook open to a page he was clearly not reading. He looked up when she came in. My uncle is here, he said. I know, I spoke with him. Nico's expression tightened. What did he say? He told me that you see things with the particular clarity of someone who's 16, she said. In the nice way, that means the opposite. Nico's jaw set. He does that, I know, she said. She sat down at the counter across from him. Nico. The thing you heard yesterday. The conversation with your father. I need you to think very carefully about whether there's anything else. Anything specific, numbers, names, dates, anything that didn't make complete sense at the time. He looked at her warily. Why? Because I think what you heard was the visible edge of something much larger, she said. And if I'm right about that, then the next few weeks in this house are going to be, she chose the word carefully, difficult. He looked down at the textbook. More difficult than normal. Yes, he was quiet for a moment. Then he mentioned a name, in the hallway. When he was talking to my father, he kept his eyes on the page. Savini. And a name I didn't know, Caruso. He said Caruso was already positioned. Elena was still. He said positioned for what? She asked. He didn't say, Nico said. My father asked him that. And Matteo said he stopped reconstructing. He said, positioned to verify. That was the word, verify. Elena looked at the counter for a moment. Nico, she said carefully, I need you to act normal today. Whatever normal looks like for you. I need you to not repeat what you told me. Not to your father. Not to anyone on staff. Can you do that? He looked at her. You think it's something bad, he said. It wasn't a question. I think it's something I need to understand better, before I know what it is, she said. And I think you staying safe is more important than anything else right now. The word safe landed in his face in a way that told her he wasn't used to hearing it in this house as it applied to him. Okay, he said quietly, I can do that. She found Dante in his study at 11:15. Alone, the earlier meeting concluded. He looked at her when she came in with the expression of a man who was already managing more pieces than he could comfortably hold, and was not particularly pleased to see a new one arrive. Matteo was here, she said. He has business here, Dante said. He called me at 8 this morning, Elena said. Before he came, Dante went very still. She watched him. The stillness was not the stillness of a man who was surprised. It was the stillness of a man who was confirming something he'd already suspected and hadn't wanted confirmed. What did he say to you? Dante asked. He wanted a conversation, she said. He wanted me to contextualize what Nico might have shared with me. Had Nico shared something with you? We'd barely met, she said, using Matteo's phrasing deliberately. Dante heard the deliberateness. His eyes sharpened. Elena, he said. Her first name, which he hadn't used before. What do you know? She looked at him across the desk. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and the city was doing the thing it did after rain, where the light came back differently. Too bright, suddenly, unfiltered. I know, she said carefully, that the name Caruso means something to you. Dante sat down. Not the controlled sit of a man taking a meeting, the other kind. Where did you hear that name? He said. His voice was very quiet. From someone who shouldn't have had to hear it in the first place, she said. The light came through the cleared window and fell across the desk between them, and Dante Belandi feared, controlled, capable of silencing rooms, with a single expression, looked at her with the face of a man standing on ground he was no longer certain of. He's been running something, Dante said. The words came out like something that had been waiting a long time to be released. I didn't want to. I needed more information before I... You knew, as Lena said. I suspected. How long? He looked at the desk. 4 months. 4 months. Dante, she said. She kept her voice level because someone in this room needed to be. Whatever Matteo has been building, he's been building it against you. And now he knows that someone outside the family is in this house, in a formal legal capacity, with access to Nico, with no obligation to him. She paused. He will move faster. Dante looked at her. What do you want me to do? I want you to let me help you, she said. Officially. As Nico's guardian, I have legitimate reason to be in every conversation about the state's security that relates to Nico's welfare. I can be in rooms I otherwise wouldn't be in. I can hear things. She held his gaze. And I can document them. Dante was quiet for a long moment. The room held the aftermath of rain-cleaned air, that particular suspended clarity. You came here to refuse me, he said. I came here to say no to one thing, she said. I'm saying yes to something else. He looked at her. And in the silence of Dante Belandi's study, with the paperwork not yet signed, and the alliance not yet formal, and Matteo Belandi already 3 moves into whatever he was playing, Elena Marlowe committed herself to auteur she hadn't come looking for. But then she thought, as Ricci appeared at the door with a message that made Dante's face change as a she'd never seen before. She had never been particularly good at looking away from the thing that needed to be seen. Ricci's message was 4 words. They found Marco's body. Marco Ferrante, 22 years with the organization. Dante's most trusted financial manager. The silence after those 4 words was different from every silence that had come before. Elena looked at Dante. Dante looked at Ricci. And in that moment, Elena understood with complete clarity that she was no longer standing at the edge of something. She was in it. Marco Ferrante had been with the Belandi organization since before Nico was born. 22 years of keeping books that didn't exist in any official register, of moving money through channels that looked like legitimate business from every angle the government thought to check. He had been quiet, methodical, and invisible, in the way that genuinely useful people learn to be invisible. He had attended Lucia Belandi's funeral in the back row and cried with more genuine grief than half the men in the front. He was found in the parking structure under the Belandi Group's 3rd office building at 10:47 in the morning, slumped in the driver's seat of his car with no visible wounds, and his hands folded in his lap in a way that was too careful to be accidental. The medical examiner would eventually say cardiac event. Dante already knew that was the version of events that would appear on paper. He stood up from his desk when Ricci delivered the message and stood there for a moment, like a man who has taken a blow and is deciding whether to acknowledge it. His hand went to the edge of the desk, steadied there. Elena watched him. "How long ago?" Dante said. "They found him an hour ago," Ricci said. "Building security called it in. No witnesses." "Who else knows?" "Building staff. 2 of our people who were first on scene. I contained it." Dante looked at the desk. His hand was still on its edge. Elena could see the tendons in it. "Get Parisi," Dante said. "Not by phone." Ricci left. The door closed. The room was very quiet. Elena stayed where she was, standing near the window, because this was not her grief and not her crisis in the way it was Dante's, and she understood that proximity right now was not what was needed. What was needed was for Dante to have 30 seconds that weren't managed. Took them. He stood at the edge of his desk and looked at nothing in particular for 30 seconds, and then he straightened and the vault closed again, and he was the man who ran things. "You should leave," he said. "Probably," she said. "But I'm not going to." He looked at her. "Marco managed the accounts," she said. "He was the one person who could verify the financial records from the inside. The one person who knew which numbers were real and which were constructed." She held his gaze. "He's dead, Dante. This is not a coincidence." "I know it's not a coincidence." "Then you know what it means." He turned away from her, toward the window. The light was still doing that wrong bright thing it did after rain, and it made the lines of his face look more carved than usual, older than the room expected. "It means someone knew I was getting close," he said. "It means someone moved before you could," Elena said. "And it means whoever took Marco out is either already inside this organization or has someone inside who told them Marco was a liability." She paused. "How many people knew you were looking at the accounts?" Dante said nothing. "Dante, 2 people," he said. "Parsi and Matteo." The name sat in the air between them. Elena crossed her arms. "When did you tell Matteo?" "I didn't," Dante said. "I told Parisi, and Matteo worked closely on financial oversight." He stopped. "They have access to each other's."
Another stop.
Something crossed his face that was not quite anger and not quite grief, and was worse than both. "I trusted the wrong architecture." "You trusted your brother," Elena said. "That's not the same thing." "In this business," Dante said, "it is." She didn't argue that. She couldn't. "Where's Nico?" he said suddenly. "Kitchen as of 40 minutes ago." Dante moved toward the door. "Dante." Her voice stopped him. "Don't tell him about Marco yet." He turned. His expression said he didn't take instructions well. "He's already holding too much," she said. "One more thing right now and he'll—" She stopped, chose the language carefully. "He'll do something that draws attention. He needs one more day of not knowing." The muscle in Dante's jaw worked fine, he said. One day, he left. Elena stood alone in the study for a moment. She walked to the desk, looked at the surface of it, the clean leather blotter, the closed folders, the pen set that was probably never used because Dante Belandi did not write things down. She thought about Marco Ferrante sitting in his car with his hands folded, and she thought about Matteo Belandi calling her at 8 in the morning. And she thought about the timeline of those 2 things and what it meant. She took out her phone and called her assistant. "Cancel everything through Friday," she said. "Yes, everything. Tell the Harmon firm I'll have the brief to them by next week." A pause. "I know." cancel it anyway. She hung up and went to find Nico. He was no longer in the kitchen. She found him in the upstairs hallway outside. What she'd been told was his room, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall and his knees up and his phone face down beside him, doing nothing. Just sitting in the hallway in the specific way that teenagers sit in hallways when they don't want to be inside a room but can't leave the house. He looked up when she appeared at the end of the hall. "You're still here," he said. Second time he'd said that to her in 24 hours. "I'm still here," she said. She sat down on the floor across from him. The hallway carpet was a dark burgundy that had been expensive once and was now just old. She put her back against the opposite wall and looked at him. "My uncle came up," Nico said. "When? 20 minutes ago. He knocked on my door. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the carpet between them. He told me he was glad I was going to have someone in the house," he said. Nico's voice had that controlled quality again, the one that meant it wasn't controlled at all. "He said it was good that my father was thinking about the family. He said it like he was happy about it." "He wasn't happy about it," Elena said. "I know." A pause. He smiled the whole time he was talking. "I know what that smile looks like. It makes me feel crazy," Nico said. "Like I'm seeing something nobody else sees, but I know I'm seeing it, and he keeps..." He stopped. Pats me on the shoulder. He's been doing it since my mom died. Every time he sees me, this pat on the shoulder like he's some kind of... His voice went hard and flat. Like he's the one who gets to grieve her. Elena said nothing. She just let that sentence exist in the hallway. "Did you know your mom well?" she asked after a moment. Nico picked up his phone, put it back down. "She was the only person in this house who talked to me like I was a person," he said. "She used to..." Started again. "She used to come find me when things were bad. She'd just show up wherever I was and sit down and not say anything important. Just be there." He looked at his phone, face down on the carpet. "My dad doesn't know how to do that." "No," Elena said. "He doesn't. He tried once, after she died. He came to my room and sat in the chair by the desk, and I could tell he had something prepared to say, like he'd written it down. And he said," Nico's voice shifted slightly, some unconscious impression of a more formal register, "I know this is a difficult time. Your mother loved you. You can come to me if you need anything." He exhaled, and then he stood up and left. 12 seconds, I counted. 12 seconds, Elena said. 12 seconds. He looked at her. "He means well. I know he means well. My mom used to say that. She'd say, 'Your father loves you in the only language he knows.'" He looked away. "I just don't speak that language." Elena looked at the carpet. "Your father," she said carefully, "is currently the most dangerous and the most fragile he's ever been in his life at the same time. That combination is going to make him worse before it makes him better." She looked at Nico directly. "I'm telling you that so you're prepared. Not so you'll forgive it, just so you're not surprised by it." Nico stared at her. "Why are you telling me things?" "Because you're going to need the information. Most adults don't tell teenagers the actual things." "I'm not most adults," she said, "and you're not most teenagers." He looked at her for a long moment with the particular assessment of a kid who had been underestimated enough times to be genuinely cautious about the possibility that someone wasn't. "Okay," he said finally. Quiet provisional. She stood up from the floor. Her knees registered it, and she didn't let that show. "Stay in the house today," she said. "I was going to go out." "I know." "Stay in anyway." She met his eyes. "Please." The please landed differently than a directive would have. He looked at her, then looked away. "Fine," he said. Parisi arrived at the estate at 12:30. He was 60, built like someone who had once been built more specifically and had softened around the edges without losing the structure underneath. He had worked with Dante for 25 years, the kind of loyalty that was less about money than about the specific gravity of knowing someone so long that leaving became its own kind of loss. Elena was not in the study when Dante received him. She was in the kitchen with a cold cup of coffee and her laptop, reviewing the financial documentation she'd been quietly requesting through legitimate legal channels since her father's debt had first been made relevant. But she'd asked Ricci to leave the study door open, and the kitchen was down the hall. She could hear enough, not words, tone and rhythm. The specific cadence of two men confirming something they hadn't wanted confirmed. Long silences. A single moment that sounded like Parisi's voice breaking on something and being immediately controlled. Then, 20 minutes in, a door somewhere in the house, and footsteps, and Matteo Bellandi's voice in the hallway saying something to a staff member, easy and light, the way a man sounds when he's comfortable in a space. Elena closed her laptop. Matteo appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at her laptop, at the coffee at her. He smiled. Working from home? He said. Something like that. He moved to the counter, poured himself coffee from the pot without asking, which told her something about how long he'd been treating this house as an extension of his own. He leaned against the counter and held the cup and looked at her with the pleasant, patient expression of a man who had all the time in the world. Marco Ferrante, he said. She kept her face neutral. I don't know that name. You were in the study when Ricci came in, Matteo said. You heard she said nothing. It's a tragedy, he said. He'd been with the organization a long time. These things happen. Men under long-term stress. The heart does what the heart does. He sipped his coffee. My brother takes it hard. He's loyal to his people. It's one of his better qualities. Yes, Elena said. He'll want to investigate, of course, Matteo said. That's also one of his qualities. He doesn't accept things at face value. The smile stayed exactly where it was. I've found it's better to let him run those instincts out. He almost always arrives at the correct conclusion, eventually. Elena looked at him. Almost always, she said. Something shifted in Matteo's eyes. Just for a moment. The warmth adjusted fractionally, like a lamp with a loose connection. I'm glad you're here, he said. For Nico, the boy needs consistency. He does, she said. My brother doesn't always see that. A sigh, the performed weight of fraternal concern. He's never known quite what to do with the boy. Lucia handled that. She was a pause exceptional at it. I did what I could after. But it's not the same as having someone in the house with a formal role. He looked at her. You'll be good for him. I intend to be, Elena said. As long as your intentions and the family's interests stay aligned, Matteo said. The sentence was complete. It had a subject and a verb and a gentle terminal clause that sounded perfectly reasonable and meant exactly what it meant. Elena looked at him. Is there a reason they wouldn't be? She said. Matteo smiled. Of course not, he said. I'm just thinking out loud. He set his coffee cup on the counter, clean, deliberate and straightened. Welcome to the family, Ms. Marlowe, he said. He left. Elena sat for a moment with her hands flat on the table. Then she opened her laptop and kept working because the thing she could not afford right now was to look like she was rattled. She was rattled. She typed anyway. Dante found her at 2 o'clock. He came into the kitchen with the specific energy of a man who had been in a room with bad information for long enough that the room had started pressing back, and he needed to be somewhere else. He looked at her laptop at the window. Parisi confirmed Marco had been working on an audit, he said. Unofficial. At my request. He was cross-referencing account movements over the last 18 months, and Elena said. And his working files are gone, Dante said. His office was accessed he stopped. Between 11 last night and 6 this morning, before his body was found, before anyone would have known to look, the sequence of that sat in the air between them. Someone knew the audit existed, Elena said. 2 people knew the audit existed, Dante said. The same thing he'd said earlier, and the same weight under it. He pulled out a chair across from her and sat down, which was significant because Dante Bellondi was not a man who sat in kitchens. He sat down heavily, like the chair was a concession. Tell me what you know, he said. All of it. Whatever you've put you together. She looked at him. I need to know that you're asking because you want the truth, she said. Not because you want information you can manage. He met her gaze. Is there a difference with you? She said. Probably yes. Something moved in his face, not anger. The other thing, that brief unguarded moment where the thing underneath the control was visible. Tell me, he said. She told him. Carefully, without editorialism, the way she presented evidence in court. What Nico had heard, the specific language Matteo had used, the name Caruso, the phone call at 8 in the morning, the visit to the kitchen, the particular way Matteo had referenced Marco Ferrante without being told he was dead, without any express surprise about it being mentioned. Dante listened with his hands flat on the table and his face very still. The stillness was not blankness. It was the controlled processing of a man receiving information that was confirming the thing he'd been refusing to confirm for months. When she finished, he said nothing for a long moment. Caruso, he finally said. Victor Caruso. He runs a competing operation out of the Western District. He's been trying to move into the financial channels we control for 3 years. He looked at the table. If Matteo has been feeding him positioning. If Matteo told him where our vulnerabilities were. He didn't just tell him, Elena said. He created some of them. Dante looked up. The missing money, she said. Nico heard Matteo accusing you of it. But accusations are a useful thing to make when you're the one who took something. They shift where people look. She paused. If someone examined those accounts and found money missing, and the only evidence pointed toward the account manager's decisions, they'd look at Marco, Dante said. and Marco is no longer able to explain himself. Dante stood up. He moved to the window, which was his instinct under pressure: find a frame, look out of it, give himself a direction. His hands went into his pockets. His jaw was tight enough to see from across the room. "He's my brother," he said. The words came out stripped of everything but their factual content. "I know," Elena said. "We grew up in the same house." He stopped. "After our father died, Matteo was 17. I was 25. I was already in the organization, and I protected him. I kept him out of it for years." He asked to come in. He came to me and he asked. He wasn't talking to her now. He was talking to the window. I said yes because it was safer than saying no. If I said no, he'd have found his own way in, and I wouldn't have been able to watch him. He stopped. "I've been watching him for 20 years. And he watched you," Elena said. Dante turned. "He learned everything from you," she said. "How you think, how you protect things, what you'd accept and what you'd refuse, how you handle threats from outside versus from inside." She held his gaze. "He's not doing this because he's stupid. He's doing it because he's spent 20 years learning the exact shape of every blind spot you have." The room was very quiet. "He used Nico's grief," Dante said. "Flat, terrible." "He used your guilt about Lucia," Elena said. "Nico's grief was secondary. What Matteo needed was for you to be so occupied with managing your son's anger that you weren't watching the books." Dante looked at her for a long moment. "How do you know these things?" he said, not hostile, genuinely asking. "I grew up next to a man who ran the same playbook on a smaller stage," she said. "My father didn't steal from organized crime. He stole from clients, from partners, from anyone who trusted him enough to not look too closely." She paused. "The mechanics are the same. Keep the person you're stealing from emotionally occupied. Make them feel guilty about something real. Move the evidence in a direction that points away." Dante looked at her. "Your father," he said, "is a small and frightened man who made large and frightened decisions," she said. "And I spent my 20s cleaning up after him, until I realized that cleaning up after him was just giving him more time to make new ones." She looked at the table. "I stopped when I was 28. I let him face the first consequence he'd ever actually faced." "The debt," Dante said. "The debt," she said. Something shifted in the air between them. Not warmth exactly. Recognition. "I'm going to need documentation," Dante said. He was back in operational mode, the personal window closed. "Whatever you've been building through legal channels, I need it consolidated. I can have it to you by tonight. And I need you to keep Nico." "I know, he can't know about Marco yet." "I already told him we had one day," Elena said. "Tomorrow you need to tell him yourself." Dante's expression shifted. It's not negotiable," she said. Not loudly. "He's going to find out. If he finds out from someone on staff before you tell him, you lose another 2 years of any possible relationship with your son." She looked at him directly. "I'm here to protect Nico. Part of protecting him is making sure his father doesn't keep making the same mistake." Dante stared at her. She stared back. "Fine," he said. "Tomorrow." The afternoon dragged in the way that high-stakes waiting always dragged long and flat, and filled with the specific tension of knowing that things were happening somewhere in the city that you couldn't see and couldn't stop. Elena worked at the kitchen table. She pulled documents, cross-referenced accounts, built the kind of paper trail that would matter in a courtroom, even if what was happening in this house never got to a courtroom. At 4:30, Nico appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had changed clothes, and his hair was different, like he'd been somewhere he wasn't supposed to be, and had tried to look like he hadn't. "I just went to the corner," he said, before she said anything. She looked at him. "I needed air," he said. 5 minutes. I was careful. "I ran into someone," he said. His voice changed. He came the rest of the way into the kitchen and stood across from her, and his face was doing something she hadn't seen before on it. A specific combination of controlled panic and calculation. "A guy. Outside the coffee place on Mercer. I've seen him before. He's been in the neighborhood a few times in the last month." He paused. "He knew my name." Elena was very still. "What did he say?" she said. He said. Nico stopped, swallowed. "Tell your father that Caruso sends his regards." He looked at her. "That's it, that's all," he said. Then he walked away. The name Caruso, in Nico's conversation at the corner, which meant someone had been watching the house, or watching Nico specifically, or both, which meant the message wasn't for Dante. It was a signal something had just been communicated about Matteo's timeline, about where things were, about how exposed the Belandi family now was. Elena closed her laptop. "You're not leaving the house again," she said. "I know," he said. He wasn't arguing. That was how she understood that he was genuinely scared. She pulled out her phone. She called Dante. He answered on the first ring. What? Nico was approached, she said, outside. Caruso's name was used. Silence on the line. 3 seconds of it. Is he in the house? Dante said. Yes, stay there. The line went dead. Nico was looking at her with the face of a teenager who had just understood that his 5 minutes of air had cost something he couldn't measure yet. I'm sorry, he said. The apology was small and real. It's not your fault, she said. But you don't go outside again until I tell you it's safe. Do you understand me? Yes, Nico, do you understand me? Yes, he said. I understand. She looked at him for a moment. Sit down, she said. I'll make you something. He sat. She went to the refrigerator, not because she was a person who made food as a comfort mechanism, but because he was 16 and hadn't eaten anything since breakfast, and she could see his hands were shaking slightly, and she needed something to do that. Wasn't stand in the middle of the kitchen and calculate how bad this had just gotten. She made him a sandwich. It was not good. The bread was wrong, and she couldn't find the right mustard. And the whole thing was slightly architectural, in a way that communicated she did not do this often. She put it on the counter in front of him. He looked at it. Thank you, he said, and ate it. Dante arrived back at the estate at 6. He came through the door with Parisi behind him, and 2 other men Elena didn't recognize, and the energy he carried with him was different from any of his other energies. It was the energy of a man who had been outside the house dealing with something that could not be dealt with and had come home with. The weight of not having dealt with it still on him. He went directly to the study. She heard the door close. At 6:45, it opened again. She was in the hallway when he came out. He almost walked past her, then stopped. The 2 men Paris brought, she said. Are they here for the house? Yes. Then you need to tell Nico tonight, she said. Not tomorrow. If there are men he doesn't know, standing in his house by morning with no explanation, he will walk out the front door. Dante looked at her. He looked exhausted in a way that was visible despite every effort not to be, the lines of it in his face, the specific dimness around his eyes. You think you know my son, he said, not harshly. I think I know what it looks like when someone is one unexplained thing away from making a catastrophic decision, she said. And I think you know that too, if you're honest. He said nothing. She waited. Give me 20 minutes, he said. Take 30, she said, but actually go talk to him. He looked at her for a moment longer. Something in his expression, not gratitude. Something more complicated than gratitude. He went toward Nico's room. Elena went back to the kitchen and sat with her cold coffee and listened to the house. She didn't hear the conversation, but she heard it happen. The murmur of voices through walls and floors, 2 of them. The shorter clipped cadence of Dante's and the longer, more erratic rhythm of Nico's. She heard a silence that lasted long enough to be significant. She heard something that might have been a chair moving. She heard Nico's voice rise once and then go quiet. She sat with her coffee and waited. At 7:30, Dante appeared in the kitchen doorway. His tie was gone. She didn't know when that had happened. His top button was open. He looked like a man who had put something down, after carrying it wrong for a long time. He wants to see you, Dante said. She got up and went. Nico was sitting on the edge of his bed with his forearms on his thighs and his head down. He looked up when she came in. His eyes were red, but his face was dry. He had cried and then stopped and then controlled it, and what was left was the exhausted clarity that comes after. He told me about Marco, he said. I know. He said you told him to tell me tonight. Yes, Nico looked at her. My mom used to do that, he said. When my dad didn't know what to do with me, she'd go to him and tell him what I needed and then send him in. He paused. He always thought it was his idea. Elena said nothing. I know what's happening, Nico said. I'm not... He exhaled. I'm not a kid. No, she said, you're not. Uncle Matteo is behind this. We believe so. I knew it, he said. And under that sentence, the specific grief of a person who had known something for a long time and had been hoping to be wrong. I knew it for a long time, and I didn't. Nobody listened. When I said things felt wrong. When I said he stopped. They told me I was another stop. My dad told me I was processing my grief wrong. The bitterness in those last words was clean and precise. He was doing both things at once, Elena said. Genuinely worried about your grief and using that worry as a reason not to look at what you were actually saying. She sat down in the desk chair across from him. That's not a defense of him. It's just the shape of it. Is he going to be okay? Nico said. She looked at him. Your father? Yes, she was quiet for a moment. I think so, she said. I think he's capable of getting through this if he stops. She chose the word, performing, and starts actually being in the room. Nico looked at her. Are you going to be here? He said. Actually here, not just on paper. Yes, she said. Even when it's... He gestured vaguely at the house around them, at everything it contained, and everything currently threatening to take it apart. Even when it's this, she said. He nodded once. Slowly. The nods of someone extending trust they couldn't fully afford and doing it anyway. She said goodnight and left him. In the hallway, she stopped and leaned against the wall for a moment and breathed. Just breathed, the particular breathing of someone who had been carrying a thing steadily all day and had gotten to a moment when no one needed anything from her for 45 seconds. She was thinking about Marco Ferrante with his hands folded in his car. She was thinking about Matteo Bellandi's phone call at 8 in the morning and the timeline of Marco's body being found at 10:47. She was thinking about Victor Caruso's man outside the coffee shop, saying Nico's name with such easy familiarity that it could only mean Nico had been watched for long enough that watching him was routine. She was thinking about the confidential financial records she'd been slowly pulling together all day, and about the document she had found at 3 in the afternoon, buried in a chain of intercompany transfers that bore Elena Marlowe's own name as a countersignatory on a transfer she had never signed. She hadn't told Dante yet. She hadn't told anyone. Because the document had been executed 3 days ago, before she had agreed to the guardianship, before she had signed anything, before she had set foot in this house as anything other than a visitor, and it bore her signature with a precision that meant someone had either forged it with access to her actual documents or had been preparing for her arrival, long before Dante sent that envelope sliding under her door, which meant one of two things. Either Matteo had anticipated that Dante would try to bring her in and had set her up in advance, or someone had told Matteo she was coming. Her hand pressed flat against the hallway wall, the burgundy carpet, the old house breathing around her. There was a third possibility, and she didn't want to look at it, and she looked at it anyway, because she had never been able to leave the dangerous thought unexamined, even when examining it was the thing that cost her sleep. The third possibility was that the envelope under her door at 7 in the morning had not come only from Dante. Someone wanted her in this house, and she was no longer certain it was just her. She stood in that hallway for another full minute before she moved. The document was on her laptop in the kitchen, still open in the tab she'd minimized when Dante came in at 6. She walked back down the hallway with the particular controlled pace of someone who needed to look like they were walking normally and was aware of every step. The 2 men Parisi had brought were positioned at the front entrance and the east corridor. She passed one of them without making eye contact, and he didn't speak. She sat down at the kitchen table. She opened the tab. The document was still there. An intercompany transfer order dated 4 days ago, routing $230,000 from a Belandi Group subsidiary account into a holding company registered in Delaware that Elena had never heard of and certainly never worked with. The signature block at the bottom carried 2 names. The first was Marco Ferrante, executed in his capacity as financial manager. The second was Elena Marlowe, listed as independent legal counsel and compliance officer for the receiving entity. Her signature, clean, accurate, matching her actual signature in proportion and pressure, in the way that only came from a high-quality scan of an original document, not a freehand forgery. She stared at it. She pulled up her own records on her phone, every document she had signed in the last 60 days, every engagement letter, every filing. Nothing connected to anything called Meridian Compliance Partners, LLC, which was the name of the Delaware entity on the transfer order. Nothing connected to the Belandi Group subsidiaries in any official capacity. She had not been retained by Dante's organization. She had come to this house as a private individual, but the document said otherwise. And the document was dated 4 days ago, which was 3 days before she had walked through the front door. She closed the laptop. She opened it again. She closed it a second time. She sat with her hands flat on the table and made herself breathe. The forgery meant 3 things with certainty. First, someone had access to a genuine signature sample of hers, which meant they had access to documents she had filed, either through legal records or through someone inside her professional life. Second, the transfer had already moved, meaning the money was gone and the paper trail existed in a completed state, not a hypothetical one. Third, the document had been created before her arrival, which meant that whoever built it had known she would be here and had decided in advance that she would be useful as a fall line, not a witness, not an ally, a suspect. She thought about Matteo's phone call at 8 in the morning. She thought about the smoothness of it, the complete absence of surprise, in his voice when he said her name. She thought about how quickly he had appeared at the estate, how easily he had moved through the kitchen, How precisely his warning had been calibrated to sound like concern. She had walked into a house where someone had already decided what role she would play. The question she could not answer yet was whether Dante had known. She did not want to believe he had known. She examined that not wanting and held it at arm's length, the way she had learned to hold her own reactions, not dismissing them, not trusting them, just acknowledging that they existed and that they were not evidence of anything except what she felt. She picked up her phone and called her encrypted server. She forwarded the document to it. She photographed it with her phone camera 3 times from 3 angles. She emailed the photographs to herself and to a secondary account she had not used in 8 months that was registered under a name that was not hers. Then she sat and thought about what she was about to do. The honest answer was that she had 2 moves. She could take the document to Dante tonight and show him what she'd found and watch his face when he saw her name on it and make her determination from that. Or she could say nothing, wait, move carefully through the next 24 hours while she built more of a picture, and accept the risk that came with the delay. The delay risk was that Matteo moved first. The confrontation risk was that Dante's face told something she couldn't come back from. She chose the confrontation. She went to find Dante. He was in the study with Parisi. She knocked and opened the door, without waiting, which she did deliberately, and both men looked at her with the specific expression of a room that had been interrupted. "I need 5 minutes," she said. Alone, Parisi looked at Dante. Dante looked at her. Something in her face communicated the register of what she was carrying, because Dante said, "Give us the room," and Parisi left without comment. She set her phone on the desk between them. The photograph of the document was on the screen. Dante looked at it. He picked up the phone. He looked at it for a long time. She watched his face with the precision she reserved for critical witnesses, tracking every shift, every micro-expression, the things the face did below the level of intention. What she saw was not recognition. What she saw was a man encountering something that was new to him and that made him immediately, viscerally furious, the specific fury of someone who understands an attack immediately upon seeing it. "When did you find this?" he said. "This afternoon," she said. 3 o'clock. "Why didn't you?" "Because I needed to be sure of what I was looking at before I brought it to you," she said. "And I needed to be sure of you." He looked up from the phone. "Of me." "The document predates my arrival by 3 days," she said. "Someone knew I would be here before I did. Either you told Matteo you were planning to bring me in, and he moved before you finalized the arrangement." She held his gaze. "Or the invitation I received was designed to put me in this house for reasons that had nothing to do with your marriage proposal." Dante set the phone down. "You think I set you up," he said. "I think it's a question I have to ask." He stood very still. The Furious was still there, under the surface, and it was not directed at her. She could read that much. But it was close enough that she kept her feet flat on the floor, and her weight even, and her face exactly where it was. "I sent you that envelope because the Marlowe debt was a legitimate organizational matter," he said. "Because my legal team identified a potential alliance that addressed a problem." His voice was controlled and precise and slightly too quiet. "I did not tell Matteo I was summoning you. I did not tell Matteo anything about your name or your role. I have spent the last 8 hours realizing how many things I did not tell Matteo that he knew anyway." She believed him. She believed him, and she logged that she believed him, and she also logged that belief was not certainty. "Meridian Compliance Partners," she said. "The Delaware entity. Can your people trace it?" "By morning," he said. "Then we have tonight to figure out what else is on that document trail," she said. "Because if Matteo built a financial fraud case that has my name on it, he'll use it," Dante said. "He'll use it as soon as he needs a distraction," she said. "He sends that document to the right people. I'm investigated. My legal license is suspended pending review. I'm removed from the guardianship on grounds of ethical violation." She looked at him. "And Nico loses the one structure that was protecting him from being used." Dante looked at the phone on the desk. "He thought of everything," he said. It came out flat, almost like admiration, which made it worse. "He had months," Elena said, "and he had you as a teacher. They worked until midnight. Packet." Pasi came back in, and the 3 of them went through the account structures with the document on the table between them, building backward from the transfer to find the chain of entities it had moved through before arriving in Meridian's account. Parasi had access to records that didn't exist in any official filing, the kind that were kept in analog form in a safe in the estate's basement, and he brought 3 folders up and opened them on the desk with the careful movements of a man who had kept these records for a long time and taken that keeping seriously. By 11, they had identified 4 additional transfers, all of them in the 4 months before Marco's death. All of them routed through subsidiary accounts that Marco had flagged in his unofficial audit, one whose files had been cleaned out the morning his body was found. 3 of the 4 had a second signatory. 2 of the 3 used Marco's name. The third used a name Elena didn't recognize. The 4th transfer, the largest one, $700,000, routed to a different entity than Meridian, had no second signatory at all. Just Matteo Belandi as Director of Internal Operations, with a notation that read Emergency Capital Reallocation approved verbally by D. Belandi. Dante stared at that line for a long time. I never approved that, he said. I know, Parisi said. The 2 words came out exhausted. He put my name on it. Yes. Dante pushed back from the desk and stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there. His reflection in the dark glass was a version of him that looked older than the room. Nobody spoke. After a moment, Dante said, How long have you known? Parisi said nothing. Sal, Dante's voice did not rise. It dropped. How long? I had suspicions, Parisi said. For about 2 months. I wasn't certain. I needed the audit to... 2 months, Dante said. I needed to be sure before I brought it to you, Parisi said. Because if I was wrong about Matteo and I came to you with it, you'd have... He stopped. I'd have what? Parisi looked at the desk. You'd have protected him, he said, like you always have. The sentence landed in the room like something falling from a height. Not vicious, just true. The specific truth that lands worse than cruelty, because it doesn't intend to hurt, it's just accurate. Dante said nothing. I should have come to you sooner, Parisi said. I was wrong to wait, but I was a breath. I was afraid of what it would do to you. Dante turned from the window. Get some sleep, he said to Parisi. His voice was perfectly flat. I need you thinking clearly tomorrow. Parisi looked at him for a moment, then gathered the folders and left. Elena sat with her hands in her lap and said nothing. She had learned in the last 12 hours that this was sometimes the only appropriate response to what she was watching happen. Not everything needed comment. Not everything needed management. Dante stood at the window a while longer. He was the only one left, he said. Quiet. Not to her specifically, after Lucia. The only one who knew the same history. Who remembered the same things. He stopped. You think you're protecting someone. You think the watching and the managing and the keeping them close. You think that's how you protect a person. He exhaled. You're just giving them a map. Elena looked at his back. You can still stop him, she said. He turned. But you have to accept that you're not going to be able to do it the way you've done everything else, she said. This isn't something you can manage quietly. Matteo has been building this publicly enough that if it comes out on his terms, it buries you. She kept her voice even. It has to come out on yours. Dante looked at her. What are you saying? I'm saying that whatever you are planning to do, contain this internally. Handle it privately. Make it disappear the way this organization makes things disappear. You can't do that anymore. She held his gaze. He has federal-level documentation with your name on it. He has my name on it. If there's an external investigation, we both go down for a fraud we didn't commit. She paused. The only way out is to take everything you've found tonight and control where it lands. You're telling me to go to the authorities, he said. The disbelief in it was genuine. I'm telling you that Matteo already went to the authorities, she said. I'd bet on it. He's been building this trail for months. He'll have a version of it that points at you ready to deliver the moment he needs leverage. She leaned forward slightly. The only thing that changes the outcome is who delivers the accurate version first. Dante stared at her. You want me to walk into a federal office, he said. I want you to make a phone call to someone you trust who is standing to file a formal complaint about corporate fraud and forged documentation, she said. I can be that person. As your son's legal guardian and an attorney of record, I have legitimate standing. The documentation we have is enough to open an investigation into Meridian and the transfer chain. She paused. It doesn't have to expose the full organization. It exposes Matteo's specific operation. The silence stretched. Dante turned back to the window. Give me tonight, he said. You have it, she said. But she waited until he turned slightly, enough to indicate he was listening. He's going to move soon. The approach to Nico today was a signal. He's telling you he's ready. Dante nodded once. She left him there. She was almost to the guest room when her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered it because she had been answering unknown numbers all day, and the habit had recalibrated. Ms. Marlowe. The voice was not Matteo's. Male, younger, flat, in the way of someone reading from a register they'd been trained to use. Mr. Caruso would like to speak with you. She stopped walking. Mr. Caruso has the wrong number, she said. Mr. Caruso is aware of the document you found this afternoon, the voice said. He thought you should know that before you decide who to trust inside that house. She stood in the hallway. Her hand was very steady on the phone. What does he want, she said. A conversation, the voice said. Tomorrow. He'll send a location, and if I don't come, a pause. He said to tell you that the copies of the Meridian documents that Mateo filed with the district attorney's office have your name on them in a very specific way. Another pause. He said you'd understand what that means. The line went dead. She stood in the dark hallway. Mateo had already filed. Not as leverage as a move. The documents were already in front of the district attorney, which meant the investigation was already open, which meant her name was already on a filing with law enforcement as a potential co-conspirator in a fraud she had not committed. The next 24 hours had just changed completely. She went back to the study. Dante was still at the window. He turned when she came in and read her face before she spoke. What happened, he said. Caruso called me, she said. On my personal phone. Dante went completely still. He knows about the Meridian document, she said. He told me Mateo has already filed a version of it with the district attorney. She watched Dante's face, which means the investigation into me is already open. And it means Mateo and Caruso are coordinating closely enough that Caruso knew within hours what was happening inside this house tonight. Dante's jaw was tight enough to see from across the room. He wants a meeting, she said. Tomorrow, he'll send a location. You're not going, Dante said. I might have to. You are not meeting with Victor Caruso, Dante said. The quiet in his voice had gone somewhere beyond controlled. That is not a negotiable point. It may be the only way to find out exactly what Mateo has filed and what form it's in, she said. If I can get in front of Caruso and understand the full scope of the documentations. Caruso doesn't give information, Dante said. He collects leverage. If you walk into a room with him, you walk out with less than you went in with. He looked at her. I know what he is. I have known him for 15 years. Then tell me what he wants with me, she said. Because he didn't call to warn me. He called to start a transaction. What does he gain from me going to that meeting? Dante looked at her. You're Nico's legal guardian, he said slowly. On paper. A signed legal document gives you access to information about the estate's holdings that affect Nico's welfare. He stopped. If he can turn you, if he can give you something that makes you willing to provide documentation or access. He gets a legitimate legal avenue into the estate's records, she said. Yes. They looked at each other. He's not trying to flip me, she said. He's trying to demonstrate that he can put me in a position where I'd consider it. He's showing Mateo he can manage the new variable. She paused. He doesn't actually expect me to cooperate. He expects the call itself to make me panic and do something that gives him information. Dante looked at her for a moment. Did it work? He said. I'm standing in your study at midnight telling you about it, she said. What do you think? Something crossed his face. Not quite the thing that was usually sealed away. Close to it. Elena, he said, the name deliberate again. I need you to understand what you're in now. Whatever you thought this was when you walked in yesterday, it isn't that anymore. Mateo has filed with the DA. Your name is on a federal document. You cannot manage your way out of that with a reasonable argument and good documentation. He looked at her steadily. The legal system does not move faster than the people inside this organization when they're cornered. I know, she said. You can leave, he said. Tonight. If you leave tonight, before the investigation formally opens, before you've been served notice. Nico, she said. He stopped. You said you can leave, she said. I heard you, and I heard what you didn't say after it. She held his gaze. I'm not leaving Nico in this house with an active threat and no independent adult in his corner. That was the agreement. The agreement was made before. The agreement was made, she said. It stands. Dante looked at her for a long moment. The sealed thing was very close to the surface now, the real thing under the vault, and she could see him holding it there. Why, he said. And the question was genuine, stripped of strategy, stripped of management, just the actual question. She thought about Nico on the floor of the hallway. She thought about 12 seconds in a chair by a desk. She thought about a woman named Lucia, who used to find the people she loved in whatever room they'd disappear to and just sit down. Because someone should, she said. She slept 4 hours. She woke at 5:15 to her phone, not a call, a text from the unknown number, an address, a time 7 a.m., a single additional line, come alone. This is not a threat. This is a conversation you need to have before the people inside that house have it for you. She lay on the guest room bed and read it 3 times. Then she got up and dressed and went to the kitchen and made coffee and drank it, standing at the counter in the early gray light. She had told Dante she wouldn't go. That wasn't precisely what she'd told him. She had declined to commit, and he had said she wasn't going, and she had not confirmed either way. The distinction mattered to her even now, which probably said something about her. She thought about the document with her name on it, sitting in a drawer at the district attorney's office. She thought about how long investigations took to open formally and how much damage could be done in the window before she had legal standing to respond. She thought about the fact that Matteo Bellondi had spent months building this architecture precisely because it was the kind of architecture that looked solid from every direction a defender would approach it from. She thought about what Caruso might know that Dante didn't. She wrote a note. She left it on the kitchen counter under her coffee cup. Gone for 2 hours. Back by 9. Don't do anything until I'm back. She picked up her car keys. The address was a coffee shop in the financial district, which was either deliberate misdirection or genuinely the least threatening choice Caruso could have made, and she couldn't decide which made her more cautious. She arrived at 6:55 and sat at a table near the window with a clear line to the door and ordered coffee she didn't need. Victor Caruso arrived at 7 exactly. He was 62 and looked like a retired academic, slight, neat, with silver hair and the kind of glasses that communicated precision rather than age. He wore a gray suit that was expensive without announcing it. He sat down across from her with the ease of someone who had chosen this table in advance and was pleased to find her already in it. "Ms. Marlowe," he said. "Mr. Caruso," she said. He looked at her, the way very intelligent people looked at other intelligent people they hadn't fully assessed yet, with a kind of focused patience, the waiting of someone who knew the first 2 minutes of a conversation were data collection. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I'm listening," she said. "That's all I've agreed to," he nodded. He picked up the menu, looked at it, put it down. The gesture was not distraction, it was a beat, deliberately. Inserted, the kind of pause a careful speaker uses before the thing they actually came to say. "Matteo Bellondi came to me 14 months ago," he said. She kept her face neutral. "He had a proposal," Caruso said. "He would provide access to the Bellondi Group's Eastern financial channels in exchange for organizational support during a transition of internal control." He folded his hands on the table. What he described was a gradual, documented takeover, legitimate in structure. He would accumulate evidence of Dante's mismanagement, real evidence, actual decisions that could be characterized as reckless, and supplement it with constructed documentation that would make the characterization irrefutable. He looked at her. He was thorough. "I'll give him that." "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because 3 weeks ago, Matteo changed the arrangement," Caruso said, without consultation. He accelerated the timeline, eliminated Marco Ferrante, and filed documentation with the DA that implicated a third party whose name I had not agreed to include. He paused. "Your name." Elena sat very still. "I don't involve people who haven't been informed that they're being involved," Caruso said. "It's a professional standard. It prevents exactly the kind of uncontrolled situation that Matteo's decision has now created." He looked at her steadily. "I did not sanction your inclusion in those documents. When I discovered it, I attempted to have the filing corrected. By that point, Matteo had submitted directly, and there was no retrieval." "You're telling me you're not responsible for the forgery," she said. "I'm telling you Matteo exceeded his mandate," Caruso said, "and created a liability I did not agree to carry." She looked at him. "What do you want?" "I want the Bellondi situation resolved cleanly," he said. "That was always my interest. A quiet, documented transition that left no debris." He looked at his folded hands. "Matteo's acceleration has created debris. Your name on a federal document is debris. Marco's death is debris." He looked up. "I want it cleaned." "By me," she said. "You're in the best position," he said. "You have legal standing. You have documentation. And you have access to Dante Bellondi in a capacity that makes your testimony about organizational fraud credible to law enforcement." He paused. "If you present what you found last night, the complete transfer chain, the forged signatures, the Meridian entity, before Matteo's version of events becomes the operative narrative, you clear your name and you create a record that reflects the actual culpability." She looked at him. "You want me to help you throw Matteo under a federal investigation," she said. "I want you to do what you were going to do anyway," Caruso said. "I'm simply telling you that you have a window of approximately." He checked his watch. 36 hours before Matteo's filing generates a formal opening of inquiry. After that, you're responding. Before that, you're acting. He met her eyes. "I'm offering you the documentation I have. My own records of the arrangement with Matteo. 14 months of correspondence, transfer records, and the original proposal he brought to me. He held her gaze. That, combined with what you found last night, makes the case complete. She was quiet for a moment. Why would you do that? She said. You expose your own involvement. My involvement was in a proposed business negotiation, he said. Nothing was completed. No transfer was executed under my arrangement. I have no criminal exposure, he paused. Matteo has substantial exposure because he executed transfers without completing the negotiation and then forged documentation to cover the gap. He looked at her. He stole from both of us, Ms. Marlowe. You and I are in the same position, implicated in something we didn't do by a man who needed human shields. She looked out the window. The financial district was filling up with morning commuters, people with coffee cups and briefcases, and the specific forward-leaning purpose of people with somewhere to be that wasn't this conversation. The documentation you're offering, she said, is it clean? It's clean, he said, untampered. My correspondence with Matteo is on a secure server with authenticated timestamps. It cannot be argued as constructed. She looked back at him. I'll need it before noon today, she said. He reached inside his jacket and set a USB drive on the table between them. I expected you'd say that, he said. She looked at the drive. She thought this could be anything. This could be the thing that makes Caruso's problem go away and makes hers unresolvable. This could be a second forgery or a trap or exactly what he said it was. She thought about 36 hours. She thought about Nico eating a bad sandwich in a kitchen and saying, I think you might actually know what you're doing. She picked up the drive. If this isn't what you say it is, she said, I'll spend whatever I have left of my legal career making sure you answer for it. I know, Caruso said. He didn't smile. He just said it like it was a condition he'd accepted before she'd stated it. She stood up. One more thing, he said. She didn't sit back down, but she waited. The man Matteo has inside the estate. He said it carefully, watching her face. The one who told him about the audit. About Marco's work. He paused. It isn't Percy. She looked at him. Then who? She said. Caruso picked up his coffee cup. The man who has been in that house for 6 years, he said. Who makes himself invisible. Who opens and closes doors. He took a sip. Ricci. The name hit her in the sternum. Ricci. Who had opened the door before she knocked on the day of her arrival. Who had been present at every key moment. Who had heard every conversation in that entrance hall. Every exchange in the corridors. Every order Dante had given since Marco started pulling financial records. Ricci. Who had taken her soaked coat on the first morning and held it away from his suit like it was evidence. Ricci, who knew the layout of the house, the way only a person who was also watching it could know. She left the coffee shop and got into her car and sat in it for 60 seconds before she started the engine. 60 seconds to hold the shape of what she now had to do, drive back to the estate, walk through a door held by a man who had been feeding information to the people trying to destroy everything inside it, and tell Dante Belandi that the person closest to him in the physical geography of his daily life had been compromised for 6 years. She started the engine. The drive back was 20 minutes. She used them. She pulled into the estate at 8:41. Ricci opened the door. She looked at him. He looked at her. He stepped back to let her in with the same neutral efficiency of every other time, and she walked past him with a particular controlled steadiness of someone carrying a detonator and choosing very carefully where to set it down. She went directly to the study. Dante was already standing when she came in, which told her he'd heard her car and been waiting. He looked at her coat, at her face, at her hands, and the sequence of that coat, face, hands told her he was reading her the way she'd learned to read him. You went, he said. I went, she said, his jaw set. I have something you need to see, she said. She set the USB drive on the desk. And something I need to tell you that's going to be worse than the drive. He looked at the drive. He looked at her. Tell me the worst thing first, he said. She looked at him steadily. She had rehearsed this in the car. She had the words in order. She delivered them, the way she delivered the most difficult testimony in the most difficult courtrooms, clearly, directly, without softening it in a way that would let him misunderstand. Ricci has been Matteo's source inside the house, she said. For 6 years, Dante did not move. She watched his face. She watched the information arrive, and she watched what it did not, the anger, not yet. The thing before the anger. The particular devastation of a man who has just learned that the geography of his daily life has been a performance, that the ordinary minutes of every ordinary day the door opened, the coat taken, the message delivered had been, for 6 years, observed and reported. His hand went to the desk. The same steadying gesture as the day before, When Ricci had brought the news about Marco, the gesture Ricci had watched him make and described to someone who was building a case against him. Dante said one word, "Where is he?" And Elena said, "Dante." And Dante walked past her out of the study. She followed him, fast, because the energy he was moving with was the energy of a man who had reached the end of the thing he could manage and was moving on instinct now. And instinct in this house was a different calibration than instinct anywhere else. Ricci was in the entrance hall. He turned when Dante came through the study doorway, and in the half-second before his face composed itself, Elena saw it the recognition, the shift, the micro-calculation of a man who has been found and knows it. Then his face was neutral again. "Ricci," Dante said. So Ricci said. Dante stopped 6 feet from him. Elena stopped in the study doorway. 6 years, Dante said. Ricci said nothing. Every conversation, Dante said. Every door. Every message you walked into a room to deliver. His voice was very quiet. "You were counting." Ricci looked at him, and then something broke in Ricci's face. Not guilt, not apology. Something older and harder, a thing that had been held in place by performance for a long time, and had finally stopped being held. "He came to me 6 years ago," Ricci said. "He told me what you'd done with the Eastern accounts, how you'd structured them, what it had cost." He stopped. "People I knew. He showed me documentation." "Matteo showed you documentation," Dante said. "People I knew," Ricci said again. His voice was rough. "People from the neighborhood, from before. He told me what happened to them because of decisions made from this house." He looked at Dante. "I didn't do it for money." "Then why?" "Because I believed him," Ricci said. "Because I had worked for you for 11 years, and I believed the person who showed me evidence over the person I worked for." He exhaled, and then it was too late to stop. The hallway was completely still. Elena watched Dante, watched the thing in his face, not anger, not anymore. The more terrible thing. The understanding. The specific, devastating understanding of a man who was realizing that the betrayal had not happened because of hatred or greed, but because of something he had actually done. Something real that Matteo had found and used, had handed to someone who trusted him enough to let it become a 6-year wound. "What did he show you?" Dante said. Ricci looked at the floor. "Dante," Elena said from the doorway. "What did he show you?" Dante said again. Ricci looked up. "The Fortuna development," he said. "The families that were displaced. The legal structure you used to acquire the land." He held Dante's gaze. "One of those families was my sister's." The hallway breathed. Dante looked at Ricci for a long moment. Then he looked at the floor, and for a brief, unguarded second, he looked like a man standing at the bottom of something he had built and watching it come down. "Get him out of the house," Dante said to the guard at the far end of the hall. His voice was completely flat. "He doesn't come back." Ricci left without another word. Dante stood in the entrance hall after he was gone and did not move. Elena came out of the study doorway and stood near him and said nothing. Because this was one of those moments, and she had learned in the last 40 hours which moments needed management and which ones just needed someone to be present in them. After a while, Dante said, "Matteo used the truth." "Yes," she said, "not a fabrication, actual." He stopped. "He found something real, and he built a weapon out of it." "Yes." He looked at her. His face was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "How do you fight that?" She looked at him. "You stop pretending the real thing isn't real," she said. "And you deal with it directly, instead of letting someone else define it for you." He held her gaze. "The documentation from Caruso," she said, "combined with what we built last night. We have enough." She kept her voice even. "But we need to move today. Not tonight, today." He nodded once. The nod of a man who had just run out of reasons to wait. "Then let's move," he said. And from upstairs, at the top of the staircase where neither of them had thought to look, Nico Bellondi stood with his hand on the banister, having heard everything, his face carrying the particular expression of a person who has just watched the last version of a story they believed finally come apart and is standing in the wreckage of it, deciding whether to fall or to stand. Nico didn't move from the top of the stairs. He stood with his hand on the banister and his weight on his back foot like a person who had started to come forward and then stopped himself. And he looked down at his father and at Elena, with the face of someone who has just heard the building they live in described as structurally unsound. Dante looked up at him. The distance between them, the length of the staircase, 12 steps, maybe 15, felt like something that couldn't be measured in feet. "How long were you standing there?" Dante said. "Long enough," Nico said. His voice was steady. That was the thing that struck Elena, not the anger she'd expected, not the fracture. Steady. The steadiness of someone who has been braced for a long time, and has finally found out what they were bracing for, and the finding out, as terrible as it was, had resolved something. He came down the stairs. He stopped at the bottom and looked at his father, and Dante looked at his son, and neither of them had the language for this moment, and both of them knew it. The Fortuna Development, Nico said. I've heard that name. Yes, Dante said. Families were displaced. Yes, Richie's sister. Dante said nothing. Were there others? Nico said. Dante looked at his son for a long moment. Elena watched Dante make a choice. She could see it happening. The actual visible moment of a man deciding between the managed version and the true one. Yes, Dante said. There were others. Nico absorbed that. His jaw worked once. Okay, he said. Just that. Okay. Dante blinked. It was the smallest thing, the involuntary response of a man who had prepared for something and received something entirely different. Okay? Dante said. I'm not. Nico stopped. Pushed his hands into his pockets. I'm not saying it was okay. I'm saying I hear you. He looked at his father. Mom used to say you carried things wrong. She said you picked them up and put them in the wrong place in your body, and then you were surprised when they made you walk crooked. He paused. I didn't know what she meant then. Dante said nothing. His throat moved. We need to move, Elena said. Not harshly, just the reality of it. I'm sorry, we do. Both of them looked at her. Nico goes somewhere safe, she said. Not in this house. Peresi is there somewhere? I know a place, Peresi said from the hallway behind her, and she startled slightly because she hadn't heard him arrive, which told her she was more depleted than she'd registered. I'm not leaving, Nico said. Nico, I heard what I heard, he said. Ricci was feeding information for 6 years. Matteo has filed documents. There are people watching this house. He looked at Elena directly. If I leave, you have less information about where I am and what's happening to me than if I stay. He held her gaze. You told me yourself the guardianship structure protects me because you know where I am. She looked at him. He was not wrong. He stays in the house, she said to Dante. In the center of the house. Not near windows, not near the entrance. She looked at Nico. And you do exactly what I tell you when I tell you. No argument. Agreed, he said. Dante was watching his son with the particular expression of a man encountering a person for the first time who has been in the room with him for years. All right, Dante said. Let's work. They used the study. All 4 of them, Dante, Elena, Parisi, and Nico sitting at the edge of the room in the leather chair that had heard 1,000 conversations, quiet and present and absorbing. Elena plugged the USB drive into the study laptop, and they went through Caruso's files methodically, Percy identifying the account structures, Elena building the legal framework, Dante listening and asking the specific questions of a man who understood organizational architecture well enough to see exactly where the seams had been cut. The Caruso documentation was clean. She'd been right to pick it up, and she let herself feel that for approximately 4 seconds before she moved on. By 10:30, they had a package the Caruso correspondence, the transfer chain from the previous night, the forged Meridian documents with Elena's signature, and a statement Elena drafted in legal language that laid out the sequence of events with the precision of a filing. She sent it to her encrypted server and to an attorney she trusted at a firm that had no connection to the Belandi organization or to her father's debt. She called that attorney at 10:45. I need you to file a formal complaint with the Federal Financial Crimes Unit, she said, today. Before 2 o'clock, she had the phone on speaker. Dante stood at the window. I'm sending you a package in the next 20 minutes. It documents a fraud operation running through a series of shell entities, including one that has forged my signature on transfer documents already submitted to the DA's office. A pause. Yes, I know what today is. I need it filed before 2 regardless. Another pause. Thank you. She hung up. 2 hours, she said to the room. Dante turned from the window. Matteo will know we're moving. He probably already knows we found Ricci, she said, which means he knows his inside line is gone. He'll accelerate. How fast? She looked at him. If I were him, I'd make a move before the federal filing creates a public record he can't control. She paused. So very fast. Dante looked at Percy. Get the men in, Parisi said. He was already moving toward the door. I'll make the calls. Parisi. Dante's voice stopped him. Only the ones you're certain of. Parisi looked at him. After Ricci, he said, I'm certain of 6. Then 6, Dante said. Percy left. Elena looked at Dante. You should call Matteo, she said. He looked at her. Not to confront him, she said. To give him a reason to believe you don't know yet. Buy us an hour. She paused. If he thinks you're still in the dark, he'll wait for a cleaner moment. If he knows you're moving, he'll move right now. Dante held her gaze for a moment. Then he picked up his phone. He called his brother. She watched him do it, watched him compose his face and his voice and his body into the posture of a man who was managing a difficult morning but not a crisis. She watched him inhabit that performance the way an actor inhabits a role they know cold. And she understood, in that moment, something about what it cost to run a life that required the constant management of face and voice, the permanent maintenance of a version of yourself that wasn't quite the real thing. Matteo, Dante said, measured, tired-sounding in the ordinary way. We need to talk about the Parisi situation. Can you come by this afternoon? A pause. 3 o'clock works. Yes, another pause. No, nothing urgent. Just loose ends. He hung up. He looked at Elena. She nodded once. They had until 3. At 12:40, Parisi came back into the study. His face told her before his words did. 2 of the 6, he said. They're not answering. He looked at Dante, Gennaro and Fitch. Dante went still. Both of them, he said, both of them. Elena looked at Parisi. Were they inside the house this morning? Gennaro was on the east corridor at 8, Parisi said. Fitch came on at 10. She thought about the drive she'd plugged into the study laptop at 9:45. The files they'd opened. The package they'd built. They saw what we were doing, she said. The room understood. He knows, Dante said. Not a question, he's not coming at 3, Elena said. He's already moving. As if to confirm it, the sound reached them from outside, not dramatic, not the sound of a movie, just the ordinary sound of a car door closing in the driveway. Then another, then a third. Parisi went to the window. His face did not change, which was how she knew it was bad. 4 vehicles, he said. 8 men at least. Dante moved before anyone else did. He crossed to the desk, opened the bottom drawer, and Elena did not look at what he took out of it. She looked at Nico instead, who had gotten up from the chair and was standing with his back against the far wall, not frozen, just placed, finding the safest physical position without being told to. She thought, he's been watching this house his whole life. He knows its geometry. Nico, she said. There's a secondary exit through the kitchen. I know it, he said. Not yet, she said. Stay with me. Right with me. He nodded. Dante looked at Parisi. The remaining 4? 2 at the front. I'll get the other 2 to the east entry. Go. Parisi left at a pace that was not quite running and entirely purposeful. Dante looked at Elena. His face was the most stripped she'd seen it, not frightened, but fully present in a way that all the management and control had been covering over. This was the man under the architecture. You should take Nico and go, he said. We've had this conversation, she said. Elena, we've had it, she said. He looked at her for 1 second. Then he looked at his son. Stay behind her, he said to Nico. The words came out rough. Whatever happens. You stay behind her, Dad, Nico said. The word came out like something he'd been holding. Just that, Dad. Not a question, not a complaint. Dante looked at his son and something in his face broke open and closed again in the span of a breath. I know, he said. We're going to talk after. Nico said, okay. Then the front door opened. Matteo Bellondi did not come in like a man making a move. He came in like a man arriving for a scheduled meeting coat on, unhurried, 2 men behind him, walking through the front entrance of a house he had moved through for decades. He came to the study doorway and stood in it and looked at Dante across the room with the expression of someone who has decided that performance is no longer necessary and is experiencing something close to relief at that. You know, Matteo said. Yes, Dante said. How long? Long enough. Matteo looked at Elena, then at Nico. Something moved in his face when he saw Nico, not guilt, not quite. Something more complicated. The expression of a person looking at collateral damage they had decided in advance was acceptable, and finding that the advanced decision is harder to hold in practice. You didn't have to involve the boy in this, Matteo said. You involved the boy? Elena said, the moment you used his grief as operational cover. Matteo looked at her. Miss Marlowe, you've been very busy. I have. Caruso called you. Not a question. He did. Matteo smiled. The warmth was gone from it entirely. Now what was left was the frame of a smile, the mechanical structure, operating out of habit. Victor Caruso is a man who protects his own interests and describes it as principle, he said. Whatever he told you, understand that it was the version that served him. It was documented, she said. Time-stamped and authenticated. Something shifted in Matteo's jaw. Fractional. The federal filing goes in before 2 o'clock today, she said. The full transfer chain, the Meridian entity, the forged signatures. She held his gaze. Your name on the emergency capital reallocation. Matteo looked at his brother. She's been thorough, he said. I'll give her that. He turned back to Elena, but she's also operating under the impression that the filing changes the material situation. He tilted his head. It doesn't. The DA already has documentation. Once an investigation opens, it doesn't close because a competing filing arrives. It widens. He paused, which means your name stays in it regardless. My name in a widened investigation that includes your forged signatures and 14 months of Caruso correspondence, pointing at your operation, is a different position than my name in your version of events, Elena said. I'll take the wider investigation. Matteo looked at her. Then he looked at Dante. 20 years, he said. The performance was entirely gone now. What was underneath it was not rage and not grief, but something flatter and more durable than both. I watched you build this. I helped you build this. I ran it when you couldn't, when Lucia was dying and you were, he stopped. Absent. I kept everything moving. Everything. His voice was controlled, but the control was a different quality now. Not the managed smoothness of before, but the tighter grip of a man holding something he genuinely felt. And when she was gone, and I looked at the accounts, what was left, what was actually there, I saw what you'd done with the Fortuna acquisition. What it had cost, not in money. He paused. In people. Don't, Dante said. Ricci's sister lost her house, Matteo said. She had 3 kids and she lost her house and the community around it because you needed the land and you structured the acquisition to make the legal challenge impossible. He looked at Dante. That wasn't the only one. Don't use the people you hurt as justification for what you built, Dante said. His voice was very quiet and very hard. You didn't build this because of Ricci's sister. You built this because you wanted what I had. You wanted to run it. He held Matteo's gaze. The rest is a story you told yourself. The room was completely still. Matteo looked at his brother for a long moment. Maybe, he said. Maybe both things are true. Then he looked at the 2 men he'd come in with and gave a small nod. Everything happened fast. The men moved toward Dante. Parisi's voice came from the hallway, sharp, commanding, and there was the sound of bodies and a door hitting a wall. Elena grabbed Nico's arm and pulled him toward the far side of the room, putting the desk between them and the door, and she felt him move with her without hesitation, his feet finding the floor, his body compact and fast, the son of a man who knew how rooms worked. Dante moved to meet the first man and did not move like someone who had spent 30 years behind a desk. He moved with the economic precision of a person who had learned certain things in a certain order and had never entirely forgotten them. And the encounter was brief and brutal, and Elena did not watch it with both eyes, because she was watching the doorway with one of them. The second man came wide. Dante caught him by the collar and the momentum of the room shifted, furniture taking the impact, the leather chair overturning, the edge of the desk catching someone's weight. The sound was nothing like cinema. It was muffled and physical and wrong in the specific way that real violence is wrong. Matteo had not moved. He stood in the doorway watching his brother, with an expression that was unreadable from where Elena stood, and she registered that he hadn't moved with a part of her mind that was running on a separate track from the part managing Nico's position and the geometry of the room. Then Matteo's hand came out of his coat. Stop, he said. The room stopped. Dante stopped. The 2 men stopped. The sounds from the hallway continued for a moment and then diminished. Matteo looked at Dante across the ruined room. At the overturned chair, the displaced desk, his brother breathing hard with his collar open, and a cut along his jaw that Elena hadn't seen happen. I don't want this, Matteo said. This isn't, he stopped. This isn't what I planned. Then put it down, Dante said. I can't put it down, Matteo said. I'm past the point where putting it down changes anything. He looked at the gun in his hand like it was a problem he'd just noticed. The filing is already there. Victor is already, he exhaled. It's already in motion, Matteo. Dante's voice shifted, stripped entirely of the operational register. Something older underneath it. Put it down. Matteo looked at his brother, and Elena, from behind the desk, watched his face, watched the thing that moved through it. The thing that was not calculation and not performance, but something real and terrible and too late. The specific expression of a person who has been running for so long toward something that they only realize in the last moment that the thing they were running toward was not what they thought it was. I took care of this family, Matteo said. The words came out rough, when you couldn't. I know, Dante said. She was dying and you were a breath. You were standing in rooms making decisions, and she was dying, and he looked at Nico. And this was the thing Elena had been watching, for the moment when the architecture of the plan encountered the actual person it had been built over, the real boy standing in the real room. I thought Matteo stopped. I thought if the organization changed hands, if things were restructured, if Nico was out of this completely. You used me, Nico said. His voice came out clear and flat from behind the desk. You used my anger at my father, and you pointed it in the direction that was useful to you. He looked at his uncle. and you're going to stand there and tell me it was for me." Matteo looked at his nephew. The gun was still in his hand. His arm was at his side, not raised, and Elena tracked that with the part of her that was tracking everything simultaneously: positions, distances, the status of the doorway, the sounds from the hallway that had gone quiet in a way that could mean two different things. "I made it worse," Matteo said. "Quieter now." "Yes," Nico said. "I thought." He stopped again. Put his hand over his face briefly, the gun pressing against his own cheek in a gesture that looked accidental, and Elena's breath stopped until the hand came down. "I thought if the organization was gone, if it was restructured, transferred, you'd be free of it. Both of you. You thought, or you told yourself you thought," Nico said. "Those are different things, and you know it." Matteo looked at the boy. "Yes," he said. "I know it." Dante took a step toward his brother. One step. Slow, visible, the step of someone announcing their intention. "Matteo," he said, "give me the gun." Matteo looked at him. "It's finished," Dante said. "The filing is going in. Caruso's documentation is in legal hands. You don't have a move that makes this better." His voice had dropped to something barely above conversational. "Don't make it worse." "I already made it worse," Matteo said. "Mark, don't," Dante said. "Not here. Not in front of the boy." Matteo looked at Nico one more time. And Nico held his uncle's gaze and did not look away. And the thing on his face was not forgiveness and not hatred, but the specific expression of someone who is witnessing something they will carry for a long time, and has decided to witness it clearly rather than look away. Matteo's arm came up. Elena moved without deciding to move. She came around the end of the desk, putting herself between the gun's angle and Nico's position. And she heard Dante shout something, and she heard Nico say her name. And Matteo fired at the ceiling. The sound was enormous in the room. Plaster came down. Everyone's ears rang with it. The smell hit sharp, acrid, and through the ringing Elena heard her own breathing, faster than she'd realized, and she was still standing, and Nico was still standing, and Dante was still standing. Matteo lowered the gun. His face was exhausted, completely, finally, absolutely exhausted, in a way that no amount of composed performance had prepared anyone in the room to see. He set the gun on the floor. He stood up straight and put his hands at his sides. "Right," he said. Parassi came through the doorway, with two of his men 30 seconds later. The hallway behind him was quiet. Elena didn't ask what quiet meant. She looked at the two men Matteo had brought in, one sitting against the far wall, with a split lip, the others still on the floor, and she looked at Parisi and nodded. They handled it. Elena sat down on the edge of the overturned chair because her legs had decided they were done performing structural integrity, and she sat there and breathed and looked at the plaster dust on the floor from the ceiling and counted her own heartbeats until they slowed. Nico sat down next to her on the floor, not in a chair. On the floor, his back against the desk, his knees up. He looked at her. "You moved," he said. "Yes." "You moved in front of me." "Yes." He said nothing for a moment. That was he stopped. "Don't say anything about it," she said. "I'm still managing my heart rate." He almost made the sound that was the blueprint of a laugh. Dante was across the room, watching Parisi's men deal with Matteo, and Elena looked at him and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say that the room hadn't already said. The federal agents arrived at 2:17. Elena's attorney had filed at 1:58, with 12 minutes to spare, and the response had been faster than Elena had calculated, because the names on the filing had triggered an existing investigation that she hadn't known about a 2-year surveillance operation running quietly out of a field office 40 miles away, watching the exact account structures she'd documented, waiting for the connecting evidence that would make the case prosecutable. They had just provided it. There were 6 agents. They came with documentation rather than weapons, which was how Elena knew the filing had landed correctly. This was an arrest built on paper, not on force, and paper arrests were the ones that held. She met them at the door. She had her credentials out. She had a copy of the filing. She had a prepared statement that she'd typed on Dante's study laptop in the 40 minutes between Matteo sitting down and the cars arriving, and she walked the lead agent through it in the entrance hall with the specificity of someone who had been building a case in her head since 8 o'clock the previous morning. The agent, a woman in her 40s, with the practical stillness of someone who had done this enough times to have stopped performing it, listened to Elena's statement and looked at the documentation and asked 4 questions, each of which Elena answered with referenced evidence. "The forged signature on the Meridian transfer," the agent said. "I have the original document and the authentication trail showing it was created from a scan of my actual signature on a filing from 8 months ago," Elena said. The scan is traceable to a specific court record accessed through the public records portal. I have the access log. The agent looked at her. You built this in 24 hours. Some of it was already built, Elena said. I just connected it. The agent looked at the study doorway where Dante Belandi stood watching. Mr. Belandi, she said. Agent, he said. We're going to need you to come in, she said. Voluntarily or formally, your choice. Same outcome. I'll come in, he said, voluntarily. My attorney will meet me there. The agent nodded. She looked at Elena. You'll need to come in too. I know, Elena said. I'll be there this afternoon. The agent looked at the room, at the plaster dust, at the displaced furniture, at the specific aftermath of a space that had been through something. Eventful morning, she said. It's been a couple of days, Elena said. It took Matteo at the door. Elena watched it happen from the hallway, watched the formal language of the arrest, the specific procedural choreography of it, the way Matteo stood through it with his hands compliant and his face entirely composed. He looked at Dante once as they were walking him out. Dante looked back, and the thing that passed between them was not reconciliation and not hatred and not forgiveness. It was the specific look of two people who had shared so much history that even this was part of it, layered in, added to everything that had come before, and neither of them could pretend that the history was only this or only anything. The door closed. The entrance hall was quiet. Elena let out a breath that she had been holding, in various forms, for approximately 36 hours. Nico appeared at the top of the stairs. He came down slowly and stood in the entrance hall and looked at the closed door, and then at his father. Is it over? He said. Dante looked at his son. The worst of it, he said. Nico looked at the door. Uncle Matteo, he said. Just the name. The sentence didn't need a predicate. Yes, Dante said. He's going to prison. Yes, Nico was quiet. He loved us, Nico said. Didn't he, in some broken way? Dante looked at his son for a long moment. Yes, he said. I think he did. That's the worst part, Nico said. Yes, Dante said. That's the worst part. Elena stood to the side of this, not apart from it, but appropriately aside from it, because this was theirs, and she was not the mediator and not the manager. She was just the person in the room, and sometimes being in the room was enough. She looked at the entrance hall, the space where Ricci had stood for 11 years opening a door. The front step where she'd arrived in the rain 48 hours ago, with a decision already made, and no idea what it was walking into. She thought, nothing about any of this has gone the way anything is supposed to go. She thought, that's probably what it looks like when things go honestly instead. Dante looked at her from across the hall. You need to be at the federal office this afternoon, he said. I know. I'll have my attorney. I have my own attorney, she said. He paused. Right, he said. A beat passed. Elena, he said. She looked at him. Thank you, he said. 2 words, stripped of everything except the meaning. She held his gaze for a moment. Don't thank me yet, she said. We still have to survive the federal interview. Something moved in his face. The blueprint of the thing she'd been watching almost arrived for 2 days. The thing beneath all the management, the thing that was not quite a smile, but close enough that from where she was standing, she could see its shape. I'll drive, he said. You absolutely will not, she said. Your driving is an organizational liability. Nico from the stairs made the sound that was finally, actually, completely a laugh. It lasted 3 seconds and filled the entrance hall and then went quiet. And in the quiet of it, Dante Belandi looked at his son laughing and looked at Elena Marlowe not laughing but close. And something settled in the architecture of the house around them, not resolved, not fixed. Nothing like that, just shifted into a different arrangement than it had been in for a very long time. The federal interview was in 2 hours. The investigation was open. The papers were filed. Matteo was gone. And Ricci's chair by the front door sat empty, and the entrance hall was full of plaster dust and afternoon light, and 3 people who had no ordinary business being a family stood in it together, figuring out what came next. The federal building downtown was the kind of architecture that communicated permanence through sheer mass stone, high ceilings, the deliberate weight of an institution that intended to outlast every person who walked through its doors. Elena had been inside it before, on other cases, in other capacities, and she had always found that it made her stand straighter without deciding to. Something about the scale of it. She went through security at 3:45. Her attorney, a compact, precise woman named Gail Ostrander, who had 20 years of federal procedure and the professional stillness of someone who had stopped being impressed by government buildings a long time ago, was already inside waiting. They sat in a hallway for 12 minutes. Elena used the time to review her statement. Not because she needed to, she had it in order, but because having paper in her hands was a way of having something to do that wasn't think about the last 48 hours. Gail looked at her. You look like someone who slept 4 hours, Gail said. I slept 4 hours. Your statement is clean, Gail said. The documentation trail is cleaner than anything I've seen built outside a formal investigation. She paused. You built this in a day. I had help. From the people you're about to testify about. From some of them, Elena said. The ones who weren't trying to bury me. Gail looked at her with the expression of a woman who had heard many things and filed them appropriately. The forged signature issue is going to come up. I know. They'll want to establish how you became aware of the Meridian entity. I'll tell them exactly how, Elena said. All of it. The document I found, the time I found it, the steps I took before I disclosed it. She looked at Gail. I have nothing to manage here. The truth is the strongest thing I have. Gail looked at her for a moment. That's either a very healthy approach or a very naive one. In this case, they're the same thing, Elena said. The agent who came to get them was not the one from the morning. This one was younger male, with the careful neutrality of someone who had been briefed to be careful. He took them through 2 sets of doors and into a conference room that had a table, 6 chairs, a recording unit, and a pitcher of water that nobody would drink. The interview lasted 3 hours. Elena told the truth. All of it, the envelope under her door, the proposal she'd refused, the guardianship she'd accepted, the document she'd found at 3 in the afternoon with her name on it and what she'd done with it in the hours that followed, the meeting with Caruso, the USB drive, the confrontation in the study. All of it in chronological order, with reference documentation for every claim that had documentation, with explicit acknowledgement where the information was witnessed but not documented. They asked about Dante. She told the truth about Dante too, what he'd known and when, what he hadn't known and why, the distinction between his organization's historical operations and the specific fraud Matteo had built. She did not minimize what Dante was. She did not characterize it beyond what she had directly observed. She said, this is what I witnessed. This is what he told me. This is what the documentation shows. This is where my knowledge ends. She said it all with the steadiness of someone who had made peace with the exposure of it before she walked in, because she'd learned a long time ago that the only version of testimony that held up under pressure was the version that didn't require her to remember what she'd changed. At 6:45, they stopped the recording. The lead agent different again, a senior one they'd brought in at the 90-minute mark, looked at her statement and the documentation and said, Miss Marlowe, your cooperation today is noted and will be reflected in any proceedings related to the Meridian filing. I want the forged signature formally cleared, Elena said, in writing, before any proceedings move forward. That will take time. I know how long it takes, she said. I'm noting the requirement now, so it's in the record that I raised it. She looked at him. I won't have my professional license sitting in a gray area while this moves through the system. The senior agent looked at Gail. Gail looked back at him with the particular expression of a woman who had also made her position clear before walking in. We can begin the formal clearance process, he said. It will be expedited given the circumstances. Thank you, Elena said. She stood up. Her back ached. Her feet hurt. The particular exhaustion of sustained alertness was settling into her body, the way it always settled, not as sleepiness but as weight, the physical accumulation of hours of being exactly present. Gail walked her out. In the lobby, before they reached the door, Gail stopped. He's going to be investigated, she said. Dante Bellondi. Whatever Matteo built, the investigation that opens from this touches the organization. I know, Elena said. Your role in that house becomes complicated. I know that too. Gail looked at her with the direct assessment of someone who had known her for 6 years and liked her enough to ask the real question. Is the guardianship actually about the kid? Elena looked at the lobby doors. Yes, she said. Not about the father. Also yes, Elena said. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Gail was quiet for a moment. Be careful, she said. Not legally, personally. I'm always careful, Elena said. You spent 48 hours inside an active organized crime situation and physically inserted yourself between a 16-year-old and a man with a gun, Gail said. That is not careful. Elena thought about that. It was calculated, she said. Elena. I'll be careful, she said. She went out through the lobby doors into the evening city, and the air outside was cooler than it had been in days, the specific coolness of a season beginning to turn, and she stood on the federal building steps and breathed it in and let it be. For exactly 1 minute, just air. Then she got into the car that was waiting. Dante's attorney had been with him for 2.5 hours by the time Elena was done. She knew because she'd gotten a text from Gail his interview had run parallel to hers, different rooms, and they had been deliberately not in contact during it, which was correct procedure and had been Elena's idea. She went back to the estate because Nico was there, and she had told him she would be back. He was in the kitchen when she arrived. He had made dinner, actual dinner, something with pasta, and a sauce that smelled like he'd followed instructions from his phone, slightly over-seasoned but genuinely warm. He had set 2 places at the kitchen counter. She sat down. He put a bowl in front of her. She ate it. "It's good," she said. "It's okay," he said. I overcooked the pasta." "It's good," she said again. He sat across from her with his own bowl, and they ate in the kitchen in the particular quiet of people who have been through something and are on the other side of it and don't need to talk about it right now. Outside the kitchen window, the city was doing its evening thing, lights coming on. The distant sound of traffic that was ordinary and had nothing to do with any of this. After a while, Nico said, "How was it long?" she said. He stopped. "Are you clear? On the document thing?" "They're working on it," she said. "It'll take time, but yes." He nodded. He pushed pasta around his bowl. "My dad texted," he said. "He's still there. He said he'd be back late." "I know." He said. Nico stopped again, picked up his fork, put it down. "He said to tell you that his attorney said your documentation was the reason the filing worked." He looked at the counter. "He said to say thank you again, and that he meant it the first time too." Elena looked at her bowl. "Tell him he can say it himself when he gets home," she said. Nico looked at her. Something in his face 16 years old, and carrying an amount of life that didn't match the number. "Are you going to stay?" he said. "Actually stay. Not just," he searched for the word, "not just manage the situation and then leave when it's resolved." She looked at him directly. "That depends on a few things," she said. "Whether the formal clearance comes through, whether the guardianship survives the scrutiny of an open investigation, whether this family does the actual work of becoming something different instead of just rearranging the same pieces." She held his gaze. "And whether you want me to." "I want you to," he said. No hesitation, she looked at him. "Okay," she said. "Then I'll stay." He looked back at his bowl. His shoulders came down a fraction, the physical drop of a thing released. "The pasta really is overcooked," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." Dante came home at 10:15. Elena was in the study, not at the desk, but in the chair by the window, with her shoes off and her legs tucked under her, and her laptop open to a document she was no longer reading. She heard him come in, heard him stop in the entrance hall, probably registering the absence of Ricci, which would keep happening, that small daily absence that would keep arriving in different rooms at different moments for a long time. He appeared in the study doorway. He looked at her in the chair. He looked at the room. He looked more tired than she had seen him look, and she had seen him in some states in the last 2 days. But this was a different kind of tired. The tired of a man who had been sitting in a room, being asked questions about his life, and had answered them honestly for the first time in a very long time. He came in and sat down in the desk chair and put his elbows on his knees and his head in his hands for a moment. Just a moment. Then he straightened. "How was yours?" he said. "Long," she said. "Yours?" "Longer." He looked at the window behind her, at the dark glass. They asked about Lucia. She waited. About the Eastern accounts. The Fortuna acquisition. He exhaled. "I told them the truth. All of it." He looked at his hands. "My attorney." Was a pause. "She told me afterward that she'd never had a client volunteer that much without being asked," Walia said. Not challenging. Genuinely asking. He was quiet for a moment. "Because you told them the truth," he said. "And because whatever comes from that is something I can answer for." He looked up. "I've been answering for things that weren't true for a long time. It turns out the true things are actually easier to carry." Elena looked at him. "The investigation is going to take time," she said. "I know. The organization, whatever structure survives this, will need to operate differently. The federal scrutiny isn't going away. I know that too. The Fortuna families," she said. "The ones the acquisition displaced. That's going to need to be addressed. Not as legal liability management." She looked at him. "As an actual address." Dante held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "With money that actually reaches them," she said. "With acknowledgement that doesn't require them to sign anything, releasing you from responsibility." She paused. "I can help structure that if you want." He looked at her for a long moment. "Why would you do that?" he said. "Because Nico is going to grow up knowing about the Fortuna acquisition," she said. "And the kind of person he becomes depends in part on whether he watches his father address it or bury it." She met his eyes. "That's a structural reason." There's also a simpler one, which is, it's the right thing to do, she said, and you know it. Dante looked at his hands. My father used to say that the right thing and the smart thing were rarely the same thing. Your father ran an organization that produced Matteo, Elena said. I'd weight his advice accordingly. Dante looked at her, and the thing that had been almost arriving for 2 days finally arrived. Not dramatic. Nothing about it was dramatic. He just looked at her, and something in his face opened, the specific opening of a man who has stopped performing for an audience that no longer required the performance, and what was underneath it was not weakness and not softness, but something more complicated and more durable than either of those things. Something that had survived everything the last 2 days had required of it and was still present. I don't know how to do this, he said. Whatever this is. He gestured slightly at the room, at the house, at the 3-person arrangement that had assembled itself out of a debt negotiation and an envelope under a door. I don't have a model for it. Neither do I, she said. You seem like you know what you're doing. I'm extrapolating from first principles, she said. There's a difference. He almost made the sound that was a laugh. Almost. Nico made pasta, she said. I saw the kitchen. He overcooked it. He always overcooks pasta, Dante said. His mother tried to teach him 4 times. Something moved through his face. Not grief. Exactly grief was too simple a word for what happened in his face when Lucia's name arrived. Something more like the acknowledgement of a permanent alteration. She said he was hopeless. He's not hopeless, Elena said. He followed the instructions from his phone and set 2 places at the counter and waited until I got home. She paused. That's not hopeless. That's someone who wanted to do something right and figured out how. Dante looked at her. He's going to be okay, she said, if you let him be. I know, Dante said. I think I know that now. The study was quiet. Outside, the city continued its ordinary nighttime operations, distant sirens, a car alarm that resolved itself, the bass note of a city that doesn't stop. There's something I need to tell you, Dante said. She looked at him. The envelope, he said. The one I sent you. He looked at the desk. It wasn't my idea. She went still. It was Parisi's, he said. He came to me 2 weeks before I sent it, and he said there was a solution to the Marlowe debt situation that addressed multiple problems simultaneously. He laid it out: the alliance, the proposal, the formal meeting. He paused. I agreed because the logic was sound. I didn't ask where the idea originated. And where did it originate? Elena said. Dante looked at her. Lucia, he said. The word sat in the room. She talked to Parisi before she died, Dante said. She knew the debt existed. She knew more about the organization's situation than I ever formally told her, because Lucia always knew more than she was told. She spoke to Parisi about the Marlowe account. He stopped. She said there was a woman, that she'd heard of Elena Marlowe through mutual professional contacts, that she was the kind of person who... He stopped again. His voice had dropped. She said she was the kind of person who fights for what's right even when it costs her. She told Priest, when the time comes, find a way to bring her in. Elena was looking at him. Lucia set this up, she said. Not the specifics, he said. Not the guardianship, she couldn't have anticipated that, but she planted the idea. She told Parisi, this family is going to need someone from outside it, who can't be bought and won't be managed. He met Elena's eyes. She was thinking about Nico and about me. He paused. She knew me well enough to know I wouldn't go looking for help voluntarily. Elena looked at the window, the dark glass. Her own faint reflection in it, and beyond it the city. She thought about Lucia Bellondi dying, thinking about the people she was leaving behind, thinking about her son, who learned that the only safe emotion was the one that looked like anger, thinking about her husband who had built himself into a structure so rigid it had no room for the things he actually felt, and doing the thing she apparently always did, going to find the person in whatever room they were in, and sitting down, and doing something practical about what she saw. She never met me, Elena said. No, Dante said. She chose me from a description. Yes. Elena looked at the window for a moment longer. She had good judgment, she said finally. She had extraordinary judgment, Dante said. In everything except choosing me. He said it without self-pity, just the honest ledger of it. She chose you, and she loved you, and she spent her last months trying to set your house in order, Elena said. I'd say her judgment was consistent. Dante looked at her. She looked back at him. Go to bed, she said. You look like a man who needs 8 hours and is going to take 5. He stood up. He paused at the edge of the desk. Elena, he said. Dante. I'm glad you walked in the rain, he said. She looked at him. Your driveway still isn't covered, she said. He left. She sat in the chair for a while longer, in the quiet of the study, with the city outside the window and the house breathing around her, and she thought about a woman she'd never met, who had seen her clearly from a description, and trusted that clarity enough to plant an idea in the mind of a loyal man and wait for the right moment to bloom. She thought, I hope I've earned it. She thought, I intend to keep earning it. 3 months moved through the Belandi estate the way seasons move, not in dramatic ruptures, but in the accumulation of small, changed things. The iron gate was still 12 feet tall. It still didn't rust. But the driveway, by the end of October, had a covered walkway along one side, simple, functional, nothing that announced itself. It was there because it was practical, which was the only reason Elena had stated when she mentioned it. And Dante had looked at her for a moment and then told the groundskeeper to arrange it. Nico went back to school. Not the school he'd been at, a different one. Smaller, in a quieter part of the city, chosen because its academic program was genuinely strong and because none of the students had grown up hearing the Belandi name at dinner tables. He complained about the commute for 3 weeks. By the 4th week, he had stopped complaining, which Elena recognized as the specific silence of someone who had found something that was actually working and didn't want to examine it too closely in case the examination broke it. He still overcooked pasta. He was getting less terrible at it. Elena kept her apartment. She had been clear about that from the beginning with Dante, with Gail, with herself. The guest room at the estate was where she stayed 3 or 4 nights a week, sometimes more during the weeks when the federal investigation required daily coordination. Her apartment was where she stayed when she needed to be a person who existed outside the context of the Belandi house, which she had determined was a necessary condition of remaining someone useful inside it. Dante had not argued. He had not argued about much, which was itself a kind of change. Not because he'd become agreeable, he remained the most controlled, most difficult, most precisely infuriating person she had ever negotiated with in her professional life, but because the nature of the disagreements had changed. They fought about real things now, about the pace of organizational restructuring and what the legitimate businesses could absorb and what needed to be severed entirely, about Nico's schedule and what he needed versus what he wanted, about the Fortuna families and how to approach them without the approach feeling like what it was also legally required to be. Those fights were long and specific, and occasionally loud, and always concluded, because both of them eventually ran out of wrong things to say and arrived at the right one. The Fortuna outreach happened in November. Elena structured it, and Dante signed the letters, and a community attorney Elena trusted acted as intermediary. It was not a legal settlement. It had no release clauses, no liability language, nothing that required the families to give anything in exchange. It was an acknowledgement and a fund, direct and unglamorous, administered through a third party that neither the Belandi organization nor the families' advocates controlled. 3 of the 7 families declined. Elena had told Dante they might, and he had understood that declining was also a form of answer, and he had said all right and meant it. The other 4 accepted. It didn't fix anything. Elena had been clear about that with Dante, and he had been clear about it with himself, which was the more important conversation. It didn't undo what the acquisition had cost those families. It didn't return years or stability, or the particular harm of having the ground pulled out. But it was a real thing, done without being forced, and it was the beginning of the kind of record that a person could build from if they were actually committed to building it. Ricci's sister was one of the 4 who accepted. Ricci himself, Elena never saw again. She didn't ask what had happened to him. She trusted that Parisi had handled it the way Parisi handled things, with the specific, unspectacular competence of a man who had decided late in his career that doing the right thing and doing the thorough thing were the same operation. Matteo Belandi's case moved through the federal system with the deliberate pace of a large institution that was sure of its evidence and in no particular hurry. By December, there was a formal indictment: fraud, financial conspiracy, obstruction, and his attorney had begun the negotiations that indicated a plea was coming. Elena was not involved in that. She had given her testimony, her documentation had been entered into the record, and the case had moved past the point where her role was operational. She received a letter in November, handwritten, no return address, postmarked from the county detention facility. It said, "I know what I did to you was wrong, not the organization. You specifically. I used your name because I needed a variable I could control, and I thought you were one. I was wrong about that too." She read it twice. She put it in a file folder in her desk at the apartment. She didn't respond. She thought about it sometimes. The particular complexity of someone who had been genuinely wronged by a real thing and had built a weapon out of the wrong that had then hurt other people who hadn't wronged him. She thought about Nico saying he loved us in some broken way. She thought that broken love was still love, and that it didn't excuse anything, and that both of those things were true simultaneously, and that holding two true things that were in tension with each other without collapsing them into something simpler was one of the harder skills of being alive. She had not mastered it. She kept working on it. The formal clearance on her professional license came through on a Thursday in late November in the form of a letter from the district attorney's office that was 3 paragraphs long and concluded that no fraud charges related to the Meridian entity would be brought against Elena Marlowe and that the forged signature had been formally documented as such for the record. Gail sent her a text that said, "Clean. Buy yourself something." Elena sent back, "Already did. Covered walkway." Gail sent, "I don't know what that means." Elena sent, "Good." The evening that mattered, the one she thought of later, when she was trying to locate the moment when the structure of things had settled into something she recognized as genuinely new rather than rearranged, happened in December. A Tuesday. Nothing particular about it. She was at the estate for dinner. Nico had made something from a recipe his mother had apparently kept in a notebook that he'd found in the back of a kitchen cabinet in October, a pasta dish that was not overcooked, that had a sauce with more steps than he'd attempted before, and that he presented with the careful off-handedness of someone who had worked on it for an hour and was not going to say so. They ate at the kitchen counter. All 3 of them. Dante ate it and said, "This is Lucia's recipe, I know," Nico said. Dante looked at the bowl. "She'd say you got the seasoning slightly wrong," he said. "I know," Nico said. "I'll fix it next time." "It's still good," Dante said. "I know," Nico said. Elena ate her portion and did not say anything, because this was theirs. This moment. And she had learned well enough by now to be in a room where something belonged to the other people in it. After dinner, Nico disappeared upstairs, with the specific upstairs disappearing of a teenager who has socially fulfilled his quota for the evening and is ready to be alone with his phone. The kitchen settled into the comfortable quiet of cleared dishes and the particular stillness that comes after a meal that went well. Dante poured 2 glasses of something that had been in a cabinet for a long time and set one on the counter in front of Elena. She looked at it. "That's not coffee," she said. "No," he said. She picked it up. He picked up his. They sat at the counter in the kitchen that had become, without any single moment of decision, the room she spent the most time in when she was in this house. "I want to say something," Dante said. "All right." He stopped, held his glass, trying to find the right way to say it for about 3 weeks. "Take your time," she said. He looked at his glass. "You never needed this house," he said. "You never needed anything from me or from this situation. You came in to refuse me, and you ended up—" He made a gesture that encompassed the house, the months, the entire sequence of. "You stayed because of Nico, and then because of—" He stopped. "Because of a lot of things." "Yes," she said. "I told you once that you'd become the reason I learned how to be a father," he said. "I meant that. I'm still—" He looked at his glass. "I'm still learning. I get it wrong regularly." "Yes," she said. "You correct me," he said, "every time." He looked up. "Without making me feel like less for needing it." She looked at him. "I'm not doing it for you," she said. "I know. I'm doing it because Nico needs a father who gets it right more often than he gets it wrong," she said. "And because you're capable of that, and someone needs to keep saying so until you believe it." "I'm starting to believe it," he said. "Good," she said. "Keep going." He looked at her for a moment. The kitchen was quiet. The city was quiet outside. "I told you I wouldn't marry you," she said, raising it deliberately, the original sentence, the one that had started all of it. "You did," he said. "That hasn't changed," she said, in case that needed saying. "It doesn't need saying," he said. "I know. What we have is—" She looked for the word. "Provisional, earned, revisable." She held his gaze. "I don't do things because I owe them or because the structure requires them. I'm here because I choose to be here. Every day I'm here, I've chosen it." "I know that," he said. "And every day I might choose differently," she said. "That's what it means for this to be real rather than obligatory." He looked at her for a long time. "Is that a warning?" he said. "It's a description," she said. "The same description I'll give you every time you need to hear it." He held her gaze, and the thing in his face, 3 months of watching it, 3 months of learning its language, was clear. Not simple, nothing about this man was simple, but clear. The specific clarity of someone who has stopped performing for the audience and has discovered, in the quiet after the performance ends, that what's left is better than what they were showing. "I told you once," he said, "that you became the reason I learned how to be a father." "You just said that," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm going somewhere with it." She waited. You also became. He stopped. You became the reason I learned that it was possible to want something that wasn't a position or a resource or an advantage. He looked at the counter. Something that was just... He stopped again. The man who controlled every room he'd ever walked into, sitting at a kitchen counter with an inadequate sentence. Dante, she said. He looked up. I know, she said. He looked at her. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, she said. They sat with that for a while. The kitchen. The December quiet. The covered walkway outside that the groundskeeper had built in October without asking what it meant. Later, when the house was fully quiet and Dante had gone to his office to do the reading he always did before sleep, and Nico's light had gone off upstairs, Elena sat alone in the kitchen for a little while longer. She was not performing a feeling or managing one. She was just sitting with it, the actual felt weight of where she was and how she'd gotten here, and what it had cost and what it had given back. She thought about the envelope under her door at 7 in the morning, that now felt like it had happened in a different life. She thought about refusing a man in a room full of people who had never seen anyone refuse him, and the silence that had followed, and the door that had opened onto a boy standing in a doorway, learning not to show what he felt. She thought about Lucia Belandi, who had never met her, who had known her anyway, who had trusted a description and planted a seed, and then died before she could see what grew from it. She thought, I hope it's what you had in mind. She thought, I think it might be better. She rinsed her glass at the sink and turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs, and the house settled around her the way a house settles, when the people in it have finally stopped bracing for the next thing and are resting instead, not finished, not fixed, not healed in any clean linear sense, but present and honest and choosing and still here. The empire that had ruled through fear was gone. What was in its place was smaller and harder and more real, and nobody had gotten it without cost, and the cost had been exactly what it had been, not more, not less, not bargained down. Elena had not become Dante Belandi's wife. She had become the person Lucia Belandi had hoped would find her family, and she had built out of a debt that wasn't hers, and a refusal that was, something that no one had thought to put in the original terms, something that wasn't owed or traded or acquired, something chosen, every single day.